Hey there, tonight we're drifting along the Erie Canal, where under the soft glow of moonlight, you'll discover that this man-made marvel was once dubbed the eighth wonder of the world, transforming the American frontier into a bustling hub of dreams and industry. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. In the early 19th century, America was in a bit of a growth spurt, like a teenager who's suddenly outgrown all their clothes. The nation was expanding westward, and folks were eager to cash in on the untapped potential of the land beyond the Appalachians. But there was one big problem: how to transport goods in a time when horsepower was still quite literally horses. Enter the Erie Canal, a project that was either a stroke of genius or a mad fever dream, depending on who you asked. Now, the Erie Canal wasn't just some small ditch. We're talking about a massive undertaking, 363 miles long, to be exact. It was designed to connect the Hudson River with Lake Erie, effectively linking the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. This would open up the interior of the continent like a can of worms, in a good way, for trade and travel. The idea was to cut down the travel time and cost of moving goods. Put it in perspective, before the canal, it could cost as much as $100 per ton to move goods overland from Buffalo to New York City. With the canal, that cost would drop to just $10. Talk about a bargain. DeWitt Clinton, the then governor of New York, was the man with the vision, or the delusion, if you were one of his many critics. Clinton was a persistent fellow, and he believed that the canal would transform New York into a bustling economic powerhouse. He was right, but convincing others wasn't easy. Critics called it Clinton's folly, or Clinton's ditch, chuckling at the thought of digging a massive trench through the wilderness. The skepticism wasn't without reason. At the time, the sheer scale of the project was unprecedented in America. There were no civil engineering schools or trained engineers in the country. The canal's proposed route meandered through dense forests, steep hills, and soggy marshlands. Building it would be like threading a needle through an overgrown garden, if the garden was full of rocks and alligators. Yet, Clinton was unfazed. He went ahead, securing a $7 million budget from the New York State Legislature in 1817. Which, even by today's standards, was a colossal gamble. But why take such a risk? Well, Clinton and his supporters saw the canal as a ticket to economic glory. New York City was already a major port, but the canal would turn it into the beating heart of American commerce. The canal promised to unlock the agricultural bounty of the Midwest, allowing farmers to ship grain, livestock, and other goods to the hungry markets of the East Coast and beyond. It wasn't just about making New York rich, though that was a nice perk. It was about linking the young nation's disparate parts, knitting them together with watery threads. Of course, not everyone was sold. Many politicians and businessmen saw Clinton's dream as a pipe dream. Thomas Jefferson, of all people, dismissed the canal as little short of madness. He wasn't alone. Skeptics were aplenty, and they had a point. The country was still licking its wounds from the War of 1812, and there were more pressing needs than digging a giant ditch. Plus, the logistics were mind-boggling. The canal would require a series of locks to lift and lower boats over the state's varied terrain, a process that seemed as mysterious and impossible as magic at the time. Despite the naysayers, construction began in 1817. The work was grueling, with laborers hacking through trees, blasting through rock, and battling the elements. It was the kind of backbreaking labor that made you wonder if there wasn't an easier way, like maybe inventing airplanes a century early. But the workers pressed on, driven by the promise of a better future, and let's be honest, the need to put food on the table. As the canal inched its way across the state, public opinion began to shift. People started to see the potential, and the skeptics were gradually drowned out by the sounds of hammers and shovels. By the time the canal was completed in 1825, it wasn't just a waterway. It was a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. And Clinton, once mocked and ridiculed, was hailed as a visionary. Funny how success has a way of rewriting history, isn't it? The Erie Canal didn't just fulfill its economic promise, it exceeded it. Goods flowed along its waters, transforming New York City into a global trading hub almost overnight. The canal became a vital artery of commerce, pumping life into the economy and fueling westward expansion. It was like the internet of its day, connecting people and places in ways that had previously been unimaginable. And it wasn't just about dollars and cents. The canal also helped forge a national identity, turning a collection of states into a united whole. So there you have it, the Erie Canal, a wild dream turned reality, a testament to vision and perseverance. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. It was worth it. And as the canal boats glided silently through the night, carrying their cargo of goods and dreams, they whispered a simple truth. Sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that change the world. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand the Erie Canal's true impact, you've got to dive into the nitty-gritty of its construction, the blood, sweat, and quite possibly tears of the men who built it. This wasn't a project for the faint of heart or the weak of back. It was a grueling test of human endurance, like the Ironman triathlon of the 19th century. And it all started with the tools, if you can even call them that. Picture this. You're handed a shovel, a wheelbarrow, and maybe a pickaxe, and told to carve a 363-mile waterway through the wilds of New York. No power tools, no GPS, just good old-fashioned elbow grease, and hopefully a decent sense of direction. The workers, many of them immigrants fresh off the boat, had to rely on their wits and sheer determination. These folks weren't exactly trained engineers. In fact, most were unskilled laborers, but they learned on the fly, becoming makeshift surveyors, masons, and blacksmiths. It was a crash course in canal building, and the stakes were high. The logistics were a nightmare, and not the kind you wake up from. The route meandered through forests that seemed to have a vendetta against progress. Trees were felled, only to reveal stubborn rocks beneath, which had to be blasted away with black powder. That might sound like fun, but trust me, it was dangerous work. Explosions were unpredictable, often leaving workers with injuries that didn't exactly come with a health plan. The canal was a dangerous beast, and taming it required a mix of bravery and recklessness. And then there were the larks. Ah, the larks, a marvel of engineering, considering the circumstances. These wonders of the canal world allowed boats to navigate the varied terrain of New York, which wasn't exactly flat as a pancake. The larks lifted and lowered boats like a magical elevator ride for cargo. But building them was anything but magical. It was painstaking labor, requiring precision that was hard to come by when your main tool was a wooden ruler. Each lark was a victory over gravity, and there were 83 of them, each a testament to human ingenuity or stubbornness, depending on how you look at it. But who were the heroes of this Herculean effort? While DeWitt Clinton gets the glory, it was the immigrants and unskilled laborers who did the heavy lifting. Thousands of Irish and German immigrants flocked to the canal, lured by the promise of work. And by work, I mean long hours of back-breaking toil for meager pay. Yet they came in droves, reshaping the landscape, and in the process, America itself. They were the unsung heroes, the gritty underdogs who turned the dream into reality, one shovelful of dirt at a time. Their living conditions were, to put it mildly, less than luxurious. Think cramped shantytowns with questionable sanitation, more mosquitoes than you'd care to count, and the constant threat of illness. Cholera outbreaks were common, adding to the already high stakes. But these folks were tougher than a $2 steak. They endured, driven by the hope of a better life, and perhaps a bit of pride in their work. Then there was the environmental impact. Building the Erie Canal was like playing guard with nature, rerouting rivers, draining swamps, and generally making a mess of things. The construction disrupted ecosystems, displaced wildlife, and altered the landscape in ways that are still felt today. It was a massive undertaking with massive consequences, changing not just the economy, but the very earth itself. But let's not forget the absurdity. Oh, the absurdity. Like the time workers tried to move a boulder the size of a small house using nothing but ropes and sheer willpower. Spoiler, it didn't work. Or when they miscalculated the canal's depth and had to go back and dig it deeper, twice. Mistakes were made, but each one taught a valuable lesson, even if it came with a side of humiliation. As the canal snaked its way toward completion, it became clear that this was no ordinary ditch. It was a testament to human tenacity, a victory over nature and naysayers alike. The Erie Canal was more than just a waterway. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together with a common purpose, even if that purpose involved a lot of mud and sweat. So, as the canal boats glided silently through the night, carrying their cargo of goods and dreams, they whispered a simple truth. The Erie Canal was as much about the journey as the destination. And while the world may remember the men like Clinton, it's the nameless workers who deserve the real credit. They laid the foundation for a new era, brick by brick, lark by lark, carving a path through the wilderness and into the annals of history. But this story is far from over. The canal's legacy is still unfolding, as we'll see in the next chapter of this watery saga. And so, as the canal boats began their glide through the night, carrying goods and dreams alike, the Erie Canal's grand opening in 1825 wasn't just a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It was the 19th century equivalent of launching a new iPhone. This event was a spectacle, complete with cannon fire and a celebratory procession that would make any parade today look like a casual stroll. New Yorkers were so hyped that they dubbed the day Clinton's Big Ditch Day, which sounds more like a neighborhood block party than a historical milestone. But hey, branding was still in its infancy. Now, here's where things get juicy. Picture DeWitt Clinton himself, smug as a cat that got the cream, aboard the Seneca Chief, the canal's first official voyage. As he ceremoniously emptied 2 casks of water from Lake Erie into the Atlantic at New York City's harbor, he symbolically married the waters. Not exactly a Vegas wedding, but it did the trick. This gesture wasn't just for show. It was a declaration that New York was now a force to be reckoned with on the global stage. The economic boom was immediate, like hitting the jackpot, but with more paperwork. The Erie Canal slashed transportation costs by a whopping 90%, turbocharging trade. Suddenly, New York City wasn't just another coastal town. It was America's commercial colossus, an economic powerhouse that made other cities look like they were still playing with monopoly money. Goods from the Midwest, like wheat and timber, flowed eastward at unprecedented rates, while manufactured products went west, creating a two-way street of prosperity. But New York City's transformation into a commercial hub didn't happen in a vacuum. The canal's ripple effects were felt across the United States, reshaping trade routes and giving birth to new towns along its path. Buffalo, Syracuse, and Rochester, once sleepy outposts, blossomed into bustling cities, thanks to the canal's lifeblood. It was like watching a lineup of underdog sports teams suddenly become championship contenders overnight. Of course, while the canal was a golden ticket for some, it wasn't all rainbows and dollar bills. The economic boom came with its own set of challenges. For instance, the canal's success undercut the livelihoods of those who relied on overland transport, like the teamsters and wagoners, who suddenly found themselves with a lot of free time and not much else. It was a classic case of creative destruction, a term coined much later but perfectly applicable here. Social changes, too, were underway. With the influx of goods and people came a surge in urbanization, as folks flocked to New York City in search of work and opportunity. The city's population exploded from about 124,000 in 1820 to over 312,000 by 1840. This kind of growth spurt was bound to give the city some growing pains, and indeed it did. Housing shortages, sanitation issues, and the not-so-small matter of rising crime rates became part of the urban landscape. The city was a playground for opportunity and mischief alike. But let's not gloss over the fact that the canal also altered the lives of ordinary people in profound ways. On the plus side, it democratized access to goods, making once luxury items like sugar and coffee more affordable for the average Joe. Farmers in the Midwest suddenly had a viable market for their produce, boosting their incomes, and in turn, their standard of living. It was a ripple effect of prosperity. A farmer in Ohio could now afford that extra pair of shoes, which might not seem like much, but try telling that to someone who's been making do with one pair for years. On the flip side, the rapid economic changes left some folks in the dust. Small towns that had thrived on local trade found themselves bypassed by the canal's new trade routes. It was like opening a shiny new freeway and suddenly realizing your quaint little roadside diner has become a ghost town. The canal, in its quest for efficiency, didn't have time for sentimentality. The Erie Canal's impact wasn't just economic or social, it was cultural too. It became a symbol of American ingenuity, of the can-do spirit that seemed to define the young nation. Yet, even as it knit the country's regions together with watery threads, it also highlighted America's growing pains. The canal was a microcosm of the nation's tensions and triumphs, illustrating both the promise and perils of progress. In summary, the Erie Canal was a transformational force, a harbinger of change that reshaped America in ways that were both exhilarating and unsettling. It was the beginning of a new chapter in the nation's history, one where the possibilities seemed as endless as the canal itself. But this story is far from over. Canal's legacy continues to evolve, as we'll see in the next part of our watery saga. So stick around, there's plenty more to dive into. As the Erie Canal's legacy continued to ripple through American consciousness, it didn't take long for myths and legends to sprout up like dandelions on a freshly mowed lawn. It was the proverbial goldmine for tales of frontier grit and economic miracles that somehow got shinier with each retelling. But let's take a reality check, shall we? First up, the heroic narrative of the canal laborer, a romanticized image of rugged individuals hacking through wilderness with nothing but sheer willpower and maybe a trusty axe. While it's true that many workers were hardy souls, their lives were less about glorious triumph and more about grueling endurance. They weren't frontiersmen conquering the wild. They were immigrants and poor locals, often living in squalor and working for a pittance. One contemporary account describes their accommodations as a little better than a pigsty, with entire families crammed into tiny shanties. So much for the American dream, huh? Then there's the myth of the Erie Canal as an unqualified economic juggernaut, turning every town it touched into a mini Manhattan. Sure, it did wonders for New York City, but not every place along the canal's route saw their fortunes rise. Some towns, bypassed by the new trade routes, withered away like forgotten toys in the attic. Even for successful towns, the economic benefits weren't always as rosy as advertised. The canal was indeed a game changer, but the game was still rigged in favor of the big players. Sound familiar? Consider the story of a farmer in upstate New York who, according to local law, supposedly struck it rich thanks to the canal. The truth: he was more likely to have seen modest gains, if any. A letter from a farmer to his brother in 1830 bemoans that the canal hath enriched the merchants, but we labourers toil for scarce a penny more. The canal may have been a highway to prosperity, but the toll booths were operated by the already wealthy. Speaking of wealth, let's turn to the supposed treasure trove of job opportunities the canal was said to provide. Yes, it created jobs, but they were often temporary and fraught with danger. Canal construction was an equal opportunity employer in terms of risk, offering plenty of opportunities to lose a limb or catch a deadly disease. The canal's completion didn't guarantee long-term employment either. Once the canal was up and running, many laborers found themselves out of work, left to navigate the choppy waters of a fledgling industrial economy. And let's not forget the technological marvels that were the canal boats themselves. Romanticized as the height of innovation, they were, in reality, cramped and rudimentary. Imagine a floating shoebox powered by mule, not exactly the Royal Caribbean. Passengers and crew alike shared these tight quarters with livestock, and the journey could be as slow as molasses in January. A traveler of the period noted that while the scenery was a delight to behold, the accommodations left much to be desired. So much for the luxury cruise experience. Despite these less-than-glamorous realities, the Erie Canal's legend continued to grow, fueled by tales of adventure and opportunity. It became a symbol of American ingenuity, even as the realities of its construction and operation were far from legendary. It was a classic case of seeing what we wanted to see, a national pastime if ever there was one. But every legend eventually meets its match, and for the Erie Canal, that came in the form of the railroad. Iron horse, faster, more efficient, and unbothered by pesky things like winter ice. The advent of railroads in the 1830s and 40s was like introducing a sports car to a world of horse-drawn buggies. Suddenly, the canal's leisurely pace seemed downright sluggish. By the 1850s, railroads were cropping up faster than you could say, all aboard, and they didn't require water to operate, a handy feature for a landlocked nation. This new technology offered speed and reliability that the canal simply couldn't compete with. A trip from Albany to Buffalo that took several days on the canal could be completed in just a day by train. The canal was like a VHS tape in a Netflix world, still functional but increasingly obsolete. The economic impact was swift. Freight costs, which had plummeted with the canal, dropped even further with the railroads. By the 1860, railroads were transporting 3 times the freight of the canal, and the canal's revenues began to nosedive. The Erie Canal, once the darling of American commerce, was starting to look a bit long in the tooth. Yet, despite its waning prominence, the canal's cultural and historical significance remained. It continued to symbolize a period of audacious ambition, a testament to a time when Americans dared to dream big and dig even bigger. Even as the canal's commercial heyday faded into the annals of history, its impact on the nation's psyche endured. In the end, the Erie Canal story is a complex tapestry of success and struggle, innovation and obsolescence. It was a marvel of its time, but like all marvels, it was eventually eclipsed by newer, faster, and more efficient technologies. The canal may have been left in the wake of progress, but its legacy continues to flow through the American narrative, a reminder of what can be achieved when vision meets perseverance, even if the results aren't always as picture-perfect as the stories suggest. So as we wrap up this chapter, remember that while the Erie Canal's golden age may have been brief, its influence was anything but setting the stage for our next deep dive into the watery saga of American ingenuity and ambition. Stay tuned. There's plenty more to uncover. As the Erie Canal drifted into the twilight of its golden days, its legacy was anything but ephemeral. The canal left behind a watermark on American history that still shimmers today, like a ghostly handprint on the nation's infrastructure blueprint. It's a tale of ambition and audacity, of backbreaking toil and triumph, a story that echoes through time with both romance and reality. Let's start with the simple fact that the Erie Canal was a game-changer, a catalyst that kick-started America's infrastructure revolution. This wasn't just a water highway. It was the prototype for future megaprojects that would come to define the American landscape. The canal proved that large-scale public works could be executed without federal intervention, an idea that made state governments everywhere perk up like meerkats spotting a predator. New York's daring gamble paid off, demonstrating that state-led initiatives could drive economic growth, a lesson that would be echoed in countless projects thereafter. In fiscal terms, the canal was a runaway success. By the 1830, it was generating over $1 million annually in tolls, a tidy sum back when the average worker was pulling in about $100 a year. It wasn't just lining the state's coffers. It was turning New York into the financial powerhouse it is today. The canal's existence validated the notion that investing in infrastructure could yield exponential economic returns, a concept not lost on later policymakers who pushed for transcontinental railroads and interstate highways. But before we start handing out participation trophies, let's get real about the human and environmental costs. The Erie Canal was built on the backs of thousands of laborers who slogged through blood, sweat, and more than a few tears to make it happen. These weren't just faceless entities in history textbooks. They were real people, often immigrants, who paid dearly for the canal's success. Many bore the brunt of dangerous conditions for meager pay, living in makeshift camps that would make a slum look like the Ritz. Their sacrifices are a stark reminder that progress often comes with a price, one paid in human lives and livelihoods. Environmentally, canal was like a bull in a china shop, barging through natural landscapes with little regard for the consequences. It rerouted rivers, drained wetlands, and altered ecosystems with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. While it transformed the economy, it also left a trail of environmental disruption in its wake. The canal taught us an early lesson in the delicate balance between development and conservation, a lesson that, let's be honest, we're still learning today. Despite these costs, the Erie Canal remains a symbol of American ingenuity and tenacity. It carved a path not just through New York, but through the American psyche, embodying the spirit of innovation that defines the nation. The canal was a testament to the power of visionaries like DeWitt Clinton, who dared to dream big even when others scoffed. It was a precursor to the kind of bold thinking that would put men on the moon and create the internet, a reminder that sometimes the most audacious ideas lead to the most profound transformations. Fast forward to today, and the Erie Canal story feels eerily relevant. With contemporary debates over infrastructure funding and modernization, the canal serves as a historical touchstone. It underscores the importance of investing in infrastructure, not just as a means of economic growth, but as a way to unite disparate regions into a cohesive whole. In an era where political gridlock often stymies progress, the canal's legacy is a call to action, a reminder of what can be achieved when ambition meets collective will. Moreover, the canal's tale is a cautionary one. It warns us about the perils of short-term gain at the expense of long-term sustainability. As we tackle issues like climate change and urban sprawl, the canal's environmental impact looms large as a reminder that progress shouldn't bulldoze the planet. It nudges us to consider the broader implications of our actions, to think beyond immediate profits to the lasting legacy we leave behind. In the grand tapestry of American history, the Erie Canal is a thread that binds past to present, a testament to the transformative power of human endeavor. It's a reminder that while the tools and technologies may change, the fundamental challenges of infrastructure and progress remain strikingly similar. As we continue to build and innovate, the canal's story is a beacon, guiding us with lessons learned from both its triumphs and its trials. So as we close the book on the Erie Canal saga, let's remember it not just as a relic of the past, but as a living lesson, a symbol of what it means to dare greatly, to dream beyond the horizon, and to forge a future that's as bold and boundless as the waters that once flowed through Clinton's ditch. In the end, the canal wasn't just a waterway. It was a pathway to possibility, a reminder that the craziest ideas are often the ones that carve the deepest channels in history. You're standing in the middle of ancient Rome, and today's the day, the grand opening of the Colosseum, also known as the Flavian Amphitheater. It's like the Super Bowl, the Olympics, and the finale of your favorite reality show all rolled into one. The year is 80 AD, and Emperor Titus is throwing a bash that would make even the most extravagant Hollywood premiere look like a backyard barbecue. The Colosseum is an architectural marvel, a stone behemoth with the capacity to seat around 50,000 Romans. But before you imagine a free-for-all marsh pit with toga-wearing citizens elbowing each other for a spot, let's get real about how this massive event actually went down. First off, forget any notion of waltzing in without a plan. Entry was a well-organized affair, not some Herculean task of shoving past your fellow citizens. The Romans had a knack for order, and here it was all about the tickets, little shards of pottery that told you where to sit. These tesserae were to Romans what QR codes are to us, minus the need for a smartphone. Seating was a matter of social hierarchy, because in Rome, who you were determined where you parked your posterior. The seating arrangement was a microcosm of Roman society, a pyramid of privilege. At the top, you had the emperor himself, with the best view in the house, naturally. Then came the senators and other VIPs, perched just above the action in the lower tiers, close enough to smell the sweat but far enough from any flying debris. If you were a Roman citizen of lesser status, you'd find yourself in the middle sections, while the plebeians and women were relegated to the nosebleeds. Foreigners and slaves. Sorry, you're standing, if you're lucky enough to get in at all. Let's talk logistics. How do you funnel 50,000 people into a building without causing a scene that would rival the gladiatorial games themselves? The Colosseum boasted no fewer than 80 entrances, each with its own number, making it the original organized chaos. These entrances allowed for swift entry and exit, reducing the risk of stampedes and maximizing efficiency. The Romans even had their own version of crowd control, with ushers guiding the human traffic, a job not for the faint-hearted, as you can imagine. Now, you might be wondering about the cost of attending such a spectacle. Was it the Roman equivalent of a Broadway ticket, or more like a freebie event? Well, the economic implications were as layered as a lasagna. The truth is, most citizens didn't pay for their tickets. The games were sponsored by the emperor or wealthy patrons as a way to curry favor with the masses, a political move wrapped in entertainment. It was bread and circuses, literally a chance to distract the populace with gratuitous gore and grandeur while keeping an eye on the emperor's popularity meter. But don't be fooled into thinking it was all sunshine and gladiators. While entry might have been free, the real economic cost was subtler and far-reaching. The games were funded by the state or wealthy individuals, and these events weren't just about entertaining the public. They were about flexing political muscle. The money spent on these spectacles could have gone to public works or feeding the populace, but instead it was poured into a blood-soaked arena for the sake of power and prestige. Yet, there was an undeniable allure to the myth of the free-for-all entry. The idea that anyone could step into the Colosseum and witness history unfold was a tantalizing thought, even if reality was more stratified. It's a reminder that myths often gloss over the gritty details in favor of a romanticized narrative that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. As you stand there, contemplating the towering arches and the intricate network of corridors and staircases, it's impossible not to marvel at the sheer scale of human endeavor. This wasn't just a building. It was a testament to Roman engineering and ambition, a statement in stone that the empire was here to stay. The Colosseum was a place where the layers of Roman society were laid bare, where the wealthy and powerful could flaunt their status, and where the common citizen could escape the daily grind, if only for a moment. So, the next time you hear someone wax poetic about the glory of the Colosseum and its egalitarian entry, you can nod knowingly. Sure, it was magnificent, but it was also a complex interplay of social, economic, and political forces that shaped not just the games, but the very fabric of Roman life. Welcome to the Colosseum, where the only thing more impressive than the architecture is the intricate dance of power that built it. But hold on to your laurels, because stepping inside the Colosseum was just the beginning of your adventure. This was no serene amphitheater experience with gentle harp music wafting through the air. Nope. The inside of the Colosseum was a bustling, clamorous beast of its own. Imagine the noise, a cacophony of 50,000 voices, the bellowing of vendors hawking their wares, and the occasional roar of wild animals that hadn't quite gotten the memo that they were supposed to save it for the main event. Now, let's talk about the heat. Rome might have been the center of the world, but it also sometimes felt like the world's biggest oven, with the Mediterranean sun beating down on a mass of humanity crammed into a stone amphitheater. You could practically see the heat waves rising. And the smell? Well, if you've ever been to a summer music festival, you might have some idea. Sweat, leather, and the less-than-pleasant aroma of humanity in close quarters didn't exactly make for an olfactory delight. But hey, when you're busy cheering on gladiators, who has time to worry about a little thing like personal space? And speaking of space, you might think that the Colosseum's seating arrangements left little room for luxury, but you'd be surprised at the perks available to those who knew where to look. Enter the world of Roman vendors, the ancient equivalent of today's stadium hawkers, but with a twist. These folks were the lifeblood of the Colosseum's social scene, offering everything from snacks to souvenirs. Forget your modern-day hot dogs and nachos. The Colosseum had its own take on fast food. Vendors roamed the stands selling sausages, figs, and even wine. Yes, you could enjoy a tipple while watching the games unfold, though the vintage might not have passed muster with a modern sommelier. The vendors weren't just about food and drink. They also offered items like cushions for those who found the stone seats a bit too Spartan for their liking. And let's not forget the souvenirs. Little trinkets and tokens that let you take a piece of the spectacle home. Because what's a day at the games without a memento to remind you of the time you saw a gladiator match, or maybe just a particularly entertaining argument over seating arrangements? Now, onto a myth that's as stubborn as the Colosseum's stone arches, the legendary thumbs-up gesture. Picture this. A gladiator stands in the arena, bloodied but victorious, awaiting the decision of the emperor or a high-ranking official. Do they live to fight another day, or is this the end of the road? You've probably heard that a thumbs up meant life and a thumbs down spelled doom. But historically speaking, it's more like Hollywood than history. The truth is, the Romans had their own cryptic gestures for these occasions, and they didn't involve the thumbs we're all so familiar with. Instead, a closed fist with a thumb concealed or a flat hand could indicate mercy, while an exposed thumb might have been the harbinger of a swift end. So the next time someone gives you a thumbs up, just remember, it might not be the universal good omen you think it is. But let's return to our bustling scene, because as anyone who's ever been to a big event knows, the people watching is half the fun. The Colosseum was a melting pot of Roman society, from the gilded senators in their reserved seats to the rowdy plebeians up in the cheap seats. Social barriers might have been etched in stone, but the games were one place where everyone could come together, if only to argue over the outcome of a chariot race or the merits of their favorite gladiator. It's a beautiful chaos, a reminder that no matter how much things change, the human love for a good spectacle remains constant. In this heady mix of noise and excitement, it's easy to forget that the games weren't just a form of entertainment. They were a tool of political power. Emperor and the elite knew all too well how to use these events to curry favor, distract the populace, and reinforce their own status. Bread and circuses, indeed. Yet the allure of the games was undeniable. They offered a respite from the rigors of daily life, a chance to see and be seen, and perhaps, if you were lucky, to witness a piece of history unfold before your eyes. So there you have it, a day in the life of a Roman citizen at the Colosseum. It was a whirlwind of sound, color, and sheer human drama, a place where the myths of Rome played out against the gritty reality of ancient life. And while we might romanticize the grandeur of it all, it's worth remembering that beneath the surface lay a complex tapestry of power, politics, and people. The Colosseum was more than just a stage for gladiators. It was a microcosm of Roman society, where the echoes of history still linger. But before we get swept away by the spectacle, let's dive into the political machinery churning beneath the Colosseum's blood-stained sands. You see, these games were not just about gladiators and lions. They were the ancient Roman equivalent of a political rally, except with more armor and fewer campaign buttons. The emperors weren't merely hosting a party. They were playing a high-stakes game of popularity poker, and the Colosseum was their ace in the hole. The phrase, bread and circuses, didn't pop out of nowhere. It was coined by the Roman satirist Juvenal, who knew a thing or two about cutting through the political noise. The idea was simple yet devilishly effective. Keep the populace fed and entertained, and they might just overlook the cracks in the empire's foundation. The games were the ultimate distraction, a way to keep the masses from asking pesky questions about taxes, corruption, or why the aqueducts always seemed to be under construction. Let's talk numbers, because the Romans loved their figures almost as much as they loved a good spectacle. At its zenith, the Colosseum could seat about 50,000 spectators, a crowd size that would make even modern stadiums blush. And the cost of these events, astronomical, doesn't even begin to cover it. A single day's games could cost the equivalent of millions in today's dollars, not including the price of exotic animals shipped from the farthest reaches of the empire. We're talking elephants, tigers, and even rhinoceroses, none of which came with a budget-friendly price tag. To foot the bill, emperors often dipped into the public treasury, which is a polite way of saying they used taxpayer money. Imagine the modern equivalent, your hard-earned cash funding an elaborate reality TV show where the stakes are life or death. But hey, as long as the bread was free and the games kept rolling, who was counting? The financial strain was real, but in the short term, it was a worthwhile investment for emperors seeking to bolster their popularity. And let's not forget the social engineering at play. The Colosseum was a microcosm of Roman society, a place where the social hierarchy was both on full display and momentarily blurred. Here, the elites could rub shoulders with the common folk, all while maintaining a comfortable distance courtesy of those stone-seeding tiers. It was a clever way for emperors to remind everyone of their place in the social pecking order, while also giving them a rare chance to feel like they were part of something bigger. But beneath the roar of the crowd and the spectacle of combat, the games served as a pressure valve for the empire's simmering tensions. Rome was a beast of a city, teeming with over 1 million people by some estimates, and not all of them were thrilled with their lot in life. Unemployment was high, and the gap between the rich and poor was as wide as the Colosseum's arches. By providing free entertainment, the emperors could placate the masses, keeping them too occupied to revolt or question the status quo. Of course, the games were also a stage for imperial propaganda. Emperors used them to showcase their power and magnanimity, doling out pardons to gladiators or staging elaborate naval battles that turned the arena into a temporary lake. It was all about optics, a way to project an image of control and benevolence while simultaneously reinforcing the emperor's divine right to rule. In the grand theater of Roman politics, the Colosseum was both stage and script, a place where the emperor could perform for his people and remind them of his might. But let's not get too caught up in the political machinations without acknowledging the mythic allure that made the games so captivating. The idea of a grand arena where life and death played out in front of thousands is as mesmerizing today as it was 2 millennia ago. It's a narrative that speaks to our primal instincts, a raw, unfiltered spectacle that taps into something deep within the human psyche. It's easy to see why the legend endures, even if the reality was far more complex and gritty than the romantic version we often imagine. So, as you picture the Colosseum in all its glory, remember that it was more than just an arena. It was a tool of political power, a social equalizer and divider, and a financial behemoth that demanded as much from its builders as it did from its spectators. The games were a carefully orchestrated dance of politics and spectacle, a testament to the lengths to which emperors would go to maintain their grip on power. And while the echoes of swords and shields may have faded, the lessons of the Colosseum endure, a reminder that sometimes greatest performances are those with the most at stake. As we peel back the layers of history, it becomes clear that the Colosseum was not just a backdrop for gladiators and beasts. It was the center stage of Roman life, a place where the empire's triumphs and tribulations played out in real time. And while we might look back with a mix of awe and horror, it's worth considering how much of our modern world echoes the arenas of the past. After all, the thirst for spectacle, the blending of politics and entertainment, and the delicate balance of power are as relevant today as they were in ancient Rome. So, next time you find yourself captivated by a modern-day spectacle, whether it's a sporting event or a political rally, remember the Colosseum. Think of the emperors who used games to sway public opinion, the citizens who cheered in the stands, and the gladiators who fought for their lives. It's a history as vibrant and complex as any drama on stage, a story of power, politics, and the enduring human desire to be part of something greater. And while we may never sit in the Colosseum's stone seats, its legacy lives on, woven into the very fabric of our shared cultural consciousness. And just like that, we're diving deeper into the underbelly of the Colosseum, where grandiosity gives way to grit. Behind the arena's roaring applause, a whole other world thrived, a world of slaves, gladiators, and engineering marvels that would make even modern architects do a double take. This was the engine room of the spectacle, the not-so-glamorous reality that kept the Colosseum's myth alive. Let's start backstage, where the real stars of the show, the gladiators, were more like high-stakes athletes than the romanticized warriors we imagine. These weren't just men who woke up one day and decided to enter the arena on a whim. Nope, they were often slaves, prisoners of war, or volunteers lured by the promise of fame and fortune. And while the stories of their glory might make for a good yarn, the truth was grimmer. Gladiators were, in essence, the property of their ludus, or gladiator school, where they trained under the watchful eyes of a Lannister, their owner and coach rolled into one. Now, let's talk numbers. Gladiators were an investment, and like any good investment, they came with a price tag. Depending on their skill level and reputation, the cost of a single gladiator could range from 3,000 to 12,000 sesterces. Think of it like buying a used car, with the added risk of it getting totaled in the arena. And in a twist of irony, the best gladiators were often the ones who lived to fight another day, earning both a paycheck and a shot at freedom. Yes, freedom. A successful gladiator could amass enough winnings to buy his way out of the arena, assuming he survived long enough to cash in. But let's not sugarcoat it. The average life expectancy of a gladiator, not great. Historical accounts vary, but some estimates suggest that gladiators lasted an average of 3 to 5 years in the arena, with many meeting their end much sooner. The games were brutal, and the odds were rarely in their favor. Yet, the allure of glory was enough to keep the sands of the Colosseum stained with ambition and blood. Behind these contests was a well-oiled machine that was as much about logistics as it was about entertainment. Enter the slaves, thousands of them, laboring in the shadows to keep the spectacle running smoothly. These were the unsung heroes who made sure the show went on, from the carpenters who built and repaired the wooden structures to the handlers who managed the exotic animals. Speaking of which, let's not forget the menagerie of beasts imported from across the empire. Lions, elephants, and bears, oh my. These animals were the blockbuster special effects of their time, and they didn't come cheap. The cost of securing these creatures was staggering. A lion, for instance, could set the state back around 1,500 sesterces, while an elephant might fetch 10 times that amount. The Romans had a taste for the exotic, and they were willing to pay top dollar to satisfy it. But it wasn't just about the price, it was about the logistics. Transporting these animals across continents required a small army of handlers, not to mention the challenge of keeping them alive long enough to make it to the arena. It was a logistical nightmare wrapped in a spectacle, and it spoke volumes about the lengths to which the Romans would go to put on a show. And speaking of shows, let's shift gears to the engineering marvels that made the Colosseum a true wonder of the ancient world. Beneath the arena floor lay a network of tunnels and chambers known as the Hypogeum, a subterranean labyrinth that would make a minotaur jealous. This was the nerve center of the Colosseum, a place where elevators and pulleys lifted gladiators and animals from the depths to the arena floor as if by magic. It was a mechanical ballet, choreographed with precision and executed with Roman ingenuity. The Hypogeum wasn't just a backstage pass, it was a game changer. Before its construction, the games were a simpler affair. But with its completion in the early 2nd century AD, the Colosseum transformed into a dynamic stage, capable of staging elaborate set pieces that would rival any modern blockbuster. Imagine an arena that could flood for naval battles, then drain to reveal a forest for a hunt, all in a single day. It was the Roman version of a special effects studio, minus the green screens. At the heart of it all was the economic engine driving these spectacles. The games were a colossal investment, fueled by a combination of state funds and private sponsorships. Wealthy citizens would often fund games as a way to boost their social standing or curry favor with the emperor. It was a win-win, at least for those with deep pockets. For the rest, it was a testament to the empire's wealth and power, a not-so-subtle reminder of who held the reins. But beneath the grandeur lay a harsh reality. These games were as much about politics as they were about entertainment. They were a tool for controlling the masses, a way to distract and placate an otherwise restless populace. The Romans understood the power of spectacle, and they wielded it like a weapon that could turn the tide of public opinion and keep the empire's wheels turning. And so, as we peel back the layers of myth and legend, we're left with a complex tapestry of human ambition, ingenuity, and folly. The Colosseum was more than just a stage for gladiators. It was a microcosm of Roman life, reflecting the empire's triumphs and tribulations in equal measure. And while the stories of glory and grandeur might captivate our imaginations, the truth is far more nuanced, a reminder that even the grandest myths are rooted in gritty reality. As we delve into this world of blood and spectacle, one thing becomes abundantly clear. The Colosseum was a marvel of its time, a testament to the heights of human achievement and the depths of human desire. It was a place where dreams were made and shattered, where the roar of the crowd echoed through the ages, leaving behind a legacy that still captivates us today. And just like that, we've peeled back another layer of the Colosseum's storied past. But hold onto your toga, because there's still more to uncover in this epic tale of power, politics, and the enduring allure of the spectacle. Stay tuned as we continue our journey into the heart of ancient Rome, where the lines between myth and reality blur into a story that's as compelling today as it was 2 millennia ago. So here we are, standing on the shoulders of ancient giants, grappling with the legacy of a monument that has loomed large over history for nearly 2 millennia, the Colosseum. This stone leviathan is more than just a tourist hotspot or a backdrop for Hollywood's sword and sandal epics. It's a survivor, a relic from a bygone era that somehow feels eerily familiar. Let's face it, the Colosseum is the ultimate ancient arena, where the reality was as gritty as the sand that swallowed gladiators' footsteps, and the myths are as enduring as the stone arches that still stand today. First off, let's get one thing straight. The Colosseum isn't just an old ruin. It's a time capsule of Roman ambition. When you strip away the romantic veneer of cinematic portrayals, complete with slow-motion battles and triumphant soundtracks, you're left with a testament to Roman engineering and the sheer audacity of human endeavor. This was a place where 50,000 people could simultaneously cheer for a lion fight and forget about the empire's crumbling aqueducts. It's like the original distraction machine, a place where the grandeur of Rome was projected in high definition, minus the CGI. But let's not kid ourselves. The Colosseum's legacy isn't just about magnificent architecture or thrilling tales of gladiatorial valor. Those are just the headline acts. The real story is in the fine print, the economic muscle, the political theater, and the societal norms that built this amphitheater of dreams and nightmares. It was a place where the scales of power were as visible as the seeding hierarchy, a social stratification that would make even the most exclusive modern clubs look inclusive. Now, if you think the Colosseum was just about giving the masses something to cheer about, think again. It was a finely tuned political instrument, a tool of social control that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. The games were a masterstroke in public relations, a way for emperors to flex their power while keeping the populace too entertained to notice any political shenanigans happening offstage. Remember, this wasn't just about blood and sand. It was about optics and control. Economically, the Colosseum was a beast. Operating costs for a single day's games could rival the GDP of a small Roman province. Between the gladiators, the exotic animals, and the elaborate sets, the expenses were astronomical. The fact that the games were free to the public only added to their allure, masking the fiscal drain they placed on the empire's coffers. It was an economic paradox, a free spectacle that cost the state a fortune but paid dividends in political stability. As we sift through the sands of time, it's clear that the Colosseum's allure goes beyond its physical structure. It's a symbol of how far humanity will go in the pursuit of spectacle, and how willing we are to overlook the darker truths that underpin our entertainments. The games were a brutal business, a point often glossed over in favor of romantic tales of glory. But the reality was that each gladiator was a cog in a bloody machine, a living testament to the lengths to which Rome would go to maintain its veneer of power. Yet the myth persists, fueled by our innate desire for stories that transcend the mundane. The Colosseum is often portrayed as a grand theater of heroism, where epic battles unfolded under the watchful gaze of emperors and guards. In reality, it was more akin to a high-stakes chess game, with human lives serving as the pieces. The narrative of noble warriors and merciful emperors is appealing, sure, but it's as polished as the marble that once adorned the arena. Fast forward to today, and the Colosseum still stands, weathered but unbowed. It's a monument to human hubris and ingenuity, a reminder that while empires rise and fall, the stories we create endure. Modern media loves to play up the drama of the arena, but it often sanitizes the brutal truths. We're drawn to the spectacle, the drama, the pageantry, all while conveniently sidestepping the harsher realities. It's a dance as old as history itself, where the line between myth and reality blurs under the spotlight. So what does the Colosseum teach us today? It's a reminder that the allure of spectacle is timeless. We still gather in arenas, albeit more comfortable ones, to cheer on our champions, to lose ourselves in the drama of competition. The trappings may have changed, but the core remains the same, a shared experience that transcends individual struggles, offering a brief respite from the chaos of the world outside. In the end, the legacy of the Colosseum is a complex tapestry of triumph and tragedy, a living testament to the power of narrative and the enduring human need for stories that captivate and compel. It's a story that continues to unfold, echoing through the ages as a reminder of the heights of human achievement and the depths of our desires. As you stand in its shadow, consider the myriad of tales it holds, both the romanticized legends and the gritty truths, and remember that history is never as simple as it seems. And there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the annals of the Colosseum's storied past. It's a saga that speaks to the very core of human nature, a reminder that while the world may change, our fascination with the spectacle endures. So, next time you find yourself captivated by a modern-day arena, take a moment to nod in acknowledgement of the ancient stones that paved the way. Because in the grand theater of history, the Colosseum is both stage and story, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and the narratives we weave. You're standing in ancient Greece, a place where the sun has two modes, leisurely roasting you like a rotisserie chicken in summer or ghosting you completely in the dead of winter. The Mediterranean climate is a bit of a drama queen. Those idyllic summer days filled with salty sea breezes, they're more of a seasonal fling. Come winter, the heat's gone faster than you can say Homeric epic, replaced by a chill that makes you reconsider that toga choice. Geographically, Greece is a patchwork of mountains and coastlines, with the odd fertile plain tossed in like an afterthought. This terrain is a mixed blessing. On one hand, you've got some killer views worthy of a philosopher's Instagram. On the other, you've got limited arable land to work with, meaning that every harvest is a gamble on the whims of the gods and the weather. Agriculture here isn't just a job, it's an extreme sport. To get through the winter, you need to be as strategic as a Spartan general. The ancient Greeks had a not-so-secret weapon, their version of the farmer's almanac. Think of it as a metronome, but for planting and harvesting. This calendar wasn't just about counting days, it was a survival manual. Timing was crucial. Sow your seeds too early, and a surprise frost might decimate your crops. Too late, and you're running a high-stakes game against the clock. Now, let's talk about the real MVPs of the ancient Greek diet, olives and grains. Forget ambrosia and nectar. Olives were the true divine gift. These little powerhouses could be pressed into oil, providing both calories and a barterable commodity. Olive oil was basically ancient Greece's answer to Bitcoin. And then there's grain, mostly barley, which was the backbone of your diet. Bread was life. Literally. If you ran out, well, let's just say starvation makes for a lousy dinner guest. Every autumn, you'd hustle to bring in the harvest. Fields turned into bustling hives of activity as families and hired hands worked from dawn until the guards switched off the sunlight. The grain would be threshed and stored, protected from the damp and the hungry eyes of mice. Those amphorae of olive oil, safeguarded like they were filled with liquid gold, because in a way they were. And let's not forget livestock. Sheep and goats were your four-legged insurance policy against famine. In winter, they offered milk, cheese, and, if things got dire, meat. These animals also doubled as natural heaters, huddling together in barns and sharing their warmth with you. Cozy, right? Just ignore the smell. The ancient Greeks also had to get creative with preservation. Pickling was big before refrigeration made it cool. Fruits and vegetables were salted, dried, or turned into wine to keep them from going bad. And let's face it, a bit of wine in winter was probably necessary for maintaining sanity when the weather kept you cooped up indoors with your extended family. But don't romanticize this too much. It wasn't all picturesque family bonding by the hearth. Winter was a test of endurance. Food shortages were common, and those without adequate stores faced real hardship. It was less about leisurely sipping mulled wine, and more about counting every olive to make sure you didn't run short by February. So here you are, living in ancient Greece, where surviving the winter requires a mix of agricultural savvy, strategic planning, and perhaps a little divine intervention. It's a world where every season brings its own challenges, and each day is a lesson in resilience. And maybe, just maybe, as you huddle by the fire, you'll find yourself uttering a small prayer to Demeter, hoping that spring won't keep you waiting too long. As you sit by the flickering fire, hoping Demeter cuts you some slack this year, let's switch gears and step into the humble abodes of ancient Greece. Forget about those majestic temples reaching for the heavens like Instagram influencers desperate for likes. We're talking everyday homes, where practicality was the real deity. And believe it or not, these homes were architectural marvels in their own right, just without the marble columns and the Herculean price tag. Picture this. A typical Greek house wasn't the sprawling villa of a Hollywood epic, but more like a strategic fortress against the elements. Enter the construction material of choice, sun-baked bricks. These weren't your average mud pies. They were crafted with a blend of clay and straw, then left to bask in the Mediterranean sun until they were harder than a Spartan's abs. The result? A sturdy wall that could take a punch from winter winds without flinching. But bricks were just the beginning. The Greeks were masters of using what they had, and roofs were no exception. Thatched roofs made from reeds or straw were the standard. Why, you ask? Because they were excellent insulators. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a cozy knit beanie, trapping heat inside and keeping the cold at bay. Plus, they added a touch of rustic charm, the kind you might find in a modern-day hipster's dream cabin. Now, let's talk layout. Greek homes were clever in design, often surrounding a central courtyard. This wasn't just for aesthetics or a spot for the family goat to roam. Courtyards served as social hubs and natural light sources. Maximizing sunlight to warm up the house during the day was like having a built-in solar panel, long before Elon Musk made it cool. The home's layout also revolved around an economic reality. Heating fuel wasn't exactly raining from the sky, so every beam of sunlight was priceless. And speaking of warmth, Greek communities were designed with an eye for collective comfort. Houses were often built in clusters, sharing walls like an ancient condo complex. This wasn't just for neighborly gossip. It was a social heating pad. Shared walls meant shared warmth, an ingenious way to conserve heat in a world where central heating systems were as mythical as centaurs. Yet, just like today, there were myths to bust. The romantic image of grandiose Greek homes with lavish decor is as far-fetched as Zeus swiping right on Tinder. Most Greek homes were simple, pragmatic, and built with the same sensibility that would make a minimalist weep with joy. Furnishings were sparse and practical, with wooden benches and clay pots being the order of the day. Luxury was having a hearth that didn't smoke you out of house and home. The economic context of these homes is crucial. Resources were limited, and importing materials was as costly as it was complicated, involving treacherous sea voyages that would make even Odysseus think twice. So, Greeks made do with local resources, showcasing a level of sustainability that would make modern eco-warriors nod in approval. This wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving with what was available. But let's not kid ourselves. Life in these homes wasn't always a Pinterest board of rustic delight. Winters were tough, and indoor heating was often limited to a single hearth. Families huddled together not just for warmth, but for survival. It wasn't uncommon for smoke to fill the room, turning the air into a hazy soup, and not the delicious kind. Those reed roofs, they had a tendency to leak, reminding everyone that the line between charming and frustratingly practical was a thin one. So here we are, in a world where the Greeks' architectural genius was all about using local materials, efficient design, and community-oriented planning. It was less about grand displays of wealth, and more about the subtle art of living well in a land that demanded resilience and ingenuity. As you sip on that imaginary cup of ancient wine, maybe you'll appreciate just how much thought went into every brick and beam, turning these humble homes into fortresses of warmth and community in the chill of winter. Ah, the ancient Greek wardrobe, where fashion meets function in a practical dance of survival, and where looking good while staying warm is as much about layering as it is about social status. If you thought your winter wardrobe was complex, try navigating the sartorial maze of ancient Greece. With the Mediterranean sun taking a vacation and leaving behind a chill that could freeze even the most stoic philosopher, clothing wasn't just about making a statement. It was about making it through the season. Let's start with the basics. The tunic, or chiton, the ancient Greeks' answer to the modern-day sweater. This wasn't just any piece of fabric. It was a carefully crafted garment, typically made from linen during warmer months and wool when the air turned cold and unforgiving. Picture this as your base layer, hugging your body like a warm embrace when the north wind comes knocking at your door. The chiton was versatile, too. It could be belted at the waist or left loose, depending on your personal flair or social occasion. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of sporting a hoodie or a tailored jacket, depending on whether you're lounging at home or heading to the agora. But here's where it gets interesting, and a tad competitive. For those who had a bit more drachma to spare, the himation was your go-to outerwear, a cloak that draped over the chiton like a regal cape. This wasn't just about fighting the cold, it was a walking billboard of your social status. Made from thick, warm wool, a well-crafted himation could set you back a decent sum, a bit like splurging on a designer coat today. And if you were really in the upper crust, you might have it dyed in vibrant colors, flaunting shades of purple or saffron like a peacock strutting its stuff. Because nothing says, "I'm important," like a dye job that costs as much as a small farm. Now, let's bust some myths. Despite what Hollywood might have you believe, ancient Greece wasn't all about draping togas in pristine white. In fact, the toga was a Roman thing. Greeks were more about function over form, though they certainly didn't skimp on elegance when resources allowed. The truth is, most folks wore clothing in natural hues, earthy browns, muted greens, and the occasional deep blue for those who could afford the expensive indigo dye. It's a palette that would make any minimalist happy. But back then, it was more about practicality than Instagram aesthetics. The economic landscape played a starring role in determining who wore what. Wool was the fabric of choice for the masses, spun locally and crafted into garments that could withstand the winter's bite. But for those whose pockets were deeper than the Aegean, imported fabrics like silk and fine cotton were the ultimate flex. Obtaining these materials was no small feat. It involved long trade routes that stretched across the known world, from the bustling markets of Egypt to the distant lands of Persia. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a luxury brand manager orchestrating the import of exclusive textiles that could make or break a household's reputation. Yet, even with rich fabrics, the garment's cut and style were dictated by strict social norms. Women, for instance, often wore the peplos, a sleeveless tunic that was pinned at the shoulders and belted at the waist. It was a garment as functional as it was fashionable, offering freedom of movement while keeping its wearer snug and warm. But let's not romanticize this too much. Women's fashion was also about maintaining modesty in a society that closely policed gender roles. Your clothing spoke volumes about your place in the social hierarchy, and woe betide those who strayed too far from convention. And while we're on the subject of conventions, let's talk footwear, or the lack thereof. Sandals were the footwear of choice for many Greeks, even in the winter months. They were practical, easy to make, and kept the feet ventilated, which was a blessing in the sometimes muggy Mediterranean climate. But when the mercury dropped, the more affluent citizens might slip on a pair of boots, crafted from leather and lined with fur. Picture these as the ancient Greek equivalent of today's trendy hiking boots, built to last and perfect for tramping through muddy fields or navigating the uneven streets of an ancient city. In the end, Greek fashion was less about haute couture and more about haute survival. It was a reflection of societal norms, economic realities, and the ever-present need to adapt to the whims of nature. Clothing was a tapestry woven with threads of practicality, status, and personal expression. So as you wrap yourself in modern layers this winter, spare a thought for the Greeks who mastered the art of layering long before it became a fashion statement. They were the original trendsetters, living in a world where every garment was a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And as we leave this episode of ancient sartorial survival, we'll soon find ourselves delving into the next chapter of Greek life, where art and culture continue to flourish, even as the cold wind howls outside. As we leave the sartorial musings of ancient Greece behind, let's dive fork-first into the culinary world, where survival was less about dinner parties and more about a high-stakes game of, can we make it through till spring? Food preservation in ancient Greece was nothing short of an art form, a culinary chess match against time and nature. Picture a bustling Greek kitchen, where the stakes are higher than your average cooking show. The clock is always ticking, and the pantry, it's a battleground. First up, let's talk salting. The Greeks were pros at this long before it became the trendy thing to do with your caramel. Salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was a lifeline. Fish, for instance, was a big deal. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a protein bar. The Aegean Sea was full of them, but fish are about as cooperative as a herd of cats when it comes to staying fresh. So, the Greeks rolled up their sleeves and embraced the power of salt. This wasn't your table salt, mind you, but coarse sea salt. It was the original preservative, turning fresh catches into long-lasting staples. You could almost hear the collective sigh of relief from fishermen and cooks alike. And then there was smoking. No, not the kind that ruins your lungs, the kind that saves your bacon. Literally, smoking meat was both an art and a necessity. It made the difference between a feast in February and an empty stomach. The Greeks would hang meats over smouldering fires, letting the smoke imbue the flesh with flavor while driving out moisture. It was like a smoky game of Marco Polo, with the Greeks calling out to their food, "Stay with me just a little longer." Now, let's bring in the amphorae, those iconic clay jars that are practically synonymous with ancient Greece. These weren't just decorative, they were the Tupperware of the ancient world. Greeks stored everything from olive oil to wine in these vessels, sealing them with wax or resin to keep the contents fresh. And when it came to grains, those amphorae were crucial for keeping out pests and moisture. Imagine it, each jar standing sentinel against the forces of spoilage, a ceramic army in your pantry. But let's not overlook the role of fermentation. This was when the Greeks truly flexed their culinary muscles. Fermentation was their backstage pass to Flavor Town, transforming everyday ingredients into preserved delicacies. Take, for example, garum, a fermented fish sauce that was the ketchup of its day. The process was simple. Layer fish and salt, let it sit in the sun, and wait for the magic to happen. The result, a pungent sauce that added umami before umami was even a thing. And speaking of fermented delights, let's raise a glass to wine, the unsung hero of Greek preservation. In a time when clean water was as elusive as a golden fleece, wine was the safer bet. But it wasn't just about getting tipsy, though that was a nice side effect. Wine was a key player in food preservation. The Greeks used it to pickle foods, and its acidity helped in preserving everything from fruits to meats. Dionysus, the god of wine, wasn't just the life of the party, he was the guardian of the pantry. Now, some might romanticize these preservation techniques, imagining rustic scenes of ancient kitchens filled with the aroma of smoked meats and fermenting fish. But let's be real, this was survival, not a culinary vacation. The smell of fermenting garum, for instance, was enough to make you question your life choices, and those amphorae, while effective, were heavy and cumbersome. A full amphora could weigh as much as 30 kilograms, 66 pounds, making trips to the pantry a workout session. The economic context of these preservation techniques is crucial. Salt wasn't cheap, and neither was the labor involved in smoking and storing foods. This was an investment, a calculated risk to ensure survival through the lean months. For many, it was a matter of life and death, and the stakes were as high as the cliffs of Delphi. Those with means could afford to stockpile and preserve, while the less fortunate often faced a winter of scarcity. It was a gritty reminder that food security was a privilege, not a given. And yet, in the face of these harsh realities, there was resilience. The Greeks turned necessity into innovation, crafting a culinary legacy that would echo through the ages. Their techniques were not just about preserving food. They were about preserving life, culture, and community. These methods of preservation became rituals, passed down through generations, woven into the very fabric of Greek life. So, as we wrap up this flavorful exploration of ancient Greek food preservation, take a moment to appreciate the ingenuity and tenacity of those who came before us. They turned their kitchens into laboratories of survival, crafting techniques that would ensure they wouldn't just endure the winter, but emerge on the other side, ready to embrace the return of the sun. As we prepare to delve into the next chapter of this ancient world, let's remember that each amphora, each salted fish, and each smoky piece of meat was a testament to human creativity and the timeless fight against the elements. Stay tuned for more, because the story of ancient Greece is far from over. As we step away from the culinary escapades of ancient Greece, let's turn the spotlight onto how these resilient folks kept their spirits up when winter turned their world into a drafty amphitheater of cold winds and scarce daylight. What kept the Greeks from succumbing to a collective cabin fever during those long, dreary months? Spoiler alert, it wasn't just the wine. First off, let's talk festivals. The Greeks knew how to throw a shindig like nobody's business, and winter was no exception. Enter the Haloa, a festival dedicated to Demeter and Dionysus, the dynamic duo of agriculture and wine. Imagine a gathering where the community came together to eat, drink, and be merry, emphasis on the drink part. The Haloa wasn't just about having a good time. It was a strategic morale booster, a way to shake off the winter blues and reinforce social ties. Think of it as the ancient Greek answer to your office holiday party, but with fewer awkward small talks and more bacchanalian revelry. Another classic was the Lenaea, a festival that mixed theatre with libations. This was Athens' winter blockbuster, where playwrights showcased their latest comedies. It was both entertainment and a subtle form of social critique, with playwrights like Aristophanes using humor to poke fun at political figures. The Lenaea was basically ancient Greece's version of Saturday Night Live, keeping the populace entertained and informed, even when stepping outside meant braving the chilly elements. But it wasn't all about the big festivals. Storytelling was the Netflix of the ancient world, a communal activity that took place around the hearth. As the wind howled outside, families and friends huddled together, sharing tales that ranged from heroic epics to local folklore. These stories weren't just about passing the time. They were a cultural glue, reminding everyone of their shared identity and values. Each tale was a thread in a tapestry of tradition, weaving together past and present in a way that a flickering firelight could only enhance. Now, let's address the myth of the idyllic Greek winter, where everyone is cozily gathered around the hearth, feasting and singing. The reality was far grittier. Food shortages were a real threat, and the communal sharing of resources wasn't always voluntary. The harsh economic truths meant that communities often had to pull together to survive. Wealthier families might share their surplus with those less fortunate, not entirely out of altruism, but because social cohesion was essential for collective survival. Picture it as an ancient version of pay it forward, where sharing a loaf of barley bread today might mean your neighbor lends you a hand during the next harvest. Economically, the winter months were a strain on even the most resourceful households. With limited trade and agriculture at a standstill, cash flow was tighter than a Spartan's belt. Barter systems flourished, with goods and services exchanged in lieu of coin. It was a time when the currency wasn't so much the drachma, but the goodwill and support of your community. This was survival economics at its most raw, where the value of a neighborly favor could outweigh a pocketful of coins. And yet, despite these challenges, the Greeks managed to turn winter into a season of resilience and creativity. They crafted a cultural legacy that showcased the human spirit's ability to adapt and thrive. Those festivals, stories, and shared meals were more than just distractions. They were a testament to the ingenuity and determination of a civilization that refused to let the cold dictate their fate. It's a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, there's room for joy and laughter, for innovation and connection. As we wrap up our journey through the winters of ancient Greece, it's tempting to romanticize their stoic perseverance, to imagine a world where every struggle was balanced by community and warmth. But let's not forget the stark reality that lay beneath the surface. These were people who faced genuine hardship, where survival hinged on a delicate balance of resourcefulness and luck. Noble Greek winter wasn't just about enduring the chill. It was about outsmarting it. In the end, what the Greeks left us is a legacy of survival through community, a blueprint for weathering life's metaphorical and literal storms. So, as you cozy up in your modern abode, surrounded by conveniences the Greeks could only dream of, spare a thought for those who huddled around their fires, sharing stories and resources, forging bonds that would endure long after the snow melted. They were the original winter warriors, crafting a narrative of resilience that echoes through the ages. And there you have it, dear listener. The tale of how the ancient Greeks not only survived, but thrived in the face of winter's bite. It's a story of ingenuity, community, and a bit of Dionysian revelry thrown in for good measure. So next time you're sipping on a warming drink or enjoying a winter festival, remember the Greeks, who turned survival into an art form and taught us all a little something about braving the cold with style and substance. Now, go forth and embrace your inner Greek, because winter is here, and history has shown us exactly how to handle it. You're standing in the bustling heart of Babylon, where the air is thick with the scent of incense and the noise of 1,000 voices bartering, praying, and arguing over the price of a goat. But you're not here for livestock. Oh no, your task today is far more mystical, or perhaps just a little bit weird. You've got a date with a sheep liver, and trust me, that's not as strange as it sounds. Welcome to divination, Babylonian style, where a sheep's insides can supposedly map out your future better than any modern-day astrology app. In this ancient city, the liver is the organ of choice for the haruspics, a fancy term for someone who reads divine messages from animal guts. Think of it as the Babylonian version of checking your daily horoscope, just with a bit more blood and a lot more ritual. The Babylonians were serious about this stuff. They believed that the gods communicated through the liver's lobes and markings, and kings relied on these soothsayers to make political and military decisions. It was like having a magic 8-ball, but with a much higher price tag and a bit more ritualistic flair. Let's talk numbers, because who doesn't love some cold, hard data? In Babylon, a skilled haruspics could command a princely sum for their services. A consultation might set you back a few shekels. Exactly how many shekels can vary, depending on your status and desperation. For a king, the cost was practically irrelevant. What mattered was securing the divine favor, or at least avoiding divine wrath. These consultations weren't just the realm of royalty, though. Merchants, farmers, and even the occasional lovesick teenager might seek out a haruspics to get a sneak peek at what the future held. It's like the ancient equivalent of a heartline psychic, except with slightly more credibility. But why livers, you ask? Great question. The liver was considered the seat of life and vitality. The Babylonians thought it was the organ most closely connected to the gods. So when they wanted to know if they should plant crops or launch a military campaign, they looked to the liver for answers. It was all about interpreting the signs. This bump here means prosperity. That discoloration suggests disaster. You can imagine the pressure to get it right. One wrong call and you could be responsible for a failed harvest or a lost battle. Then again, if you got it right, you were basically a rock star in robes. Now, let's dig a bit deeper into the economic significance of this practice. Were these rituals just some quirky pastime? Absolutely not. They were big business. The production of these rituals required resources, livestock for sacrifice, incense for the temples, and of course, the haruspex's own sustenance. The temples themselves were economic powerhouses, amassing wealth and land, much like a mix between a modern-day corporation and a celebrity influencer, but with more incense and fewer Instagram followers. Then there's the political angle. Babylonian kings didn't just casually dabble in liver reading. They leaned on it hard. When King Hammurabi, yes, the Hammurabi of the famous code, wanted to ensure victory in battle or favorable conditions for his empire, he consulted the haruspices. It's like having a boardroom full of advisors, except these advisors were more interested in entrails than spreadsheets. The king's decisions could hinge on the interpretation of a liver, and those interpretations could legitimize his rule or justify his actions. Picture it. A king strides into battle, confident not just in his army, but in the divine message etched into the liver of a freshly sacrificed sheep. This brings us to the myth versus reality check. It's tempting to romanticize these soothsayers as mystical figures with a direct line to the divine. But the reality, they were part scientist, part showman, and a whole lot of social engineer. The haruspeks had to understand anatomy, yes, but also psychology and politics. They needed to know how to read the king, the crowd, and the current state of affairs. If the haruspeks could deliver a prophecy that aligned with the king's desires or fears, so much the better. It's a delicate dance of faith and manipulation, one that required a keen understanding of human nature as much as divine will. As you stand there in ancient Babylon, liver in hand, it starts to make a twisted kind of sense. This was a world where uncertainty was the norm, where the whims of the gods could mean the difference between famine and feast. In such a world, who wouldn't want a little insider information, even if it came from a sheep's innards? And as you ponder this, the haruspeks beside you begins the ritual, chanting incantations meant to coax the secrets from the liver, secrets that could change everything. So here you are, in a world where the flow of life and power runs through a sheep's liver, as bizarre as it might seem. Yet, for the Babylonians, this was the rhythm of life, a dance between the earthly and the divine, with a bit of entrail reading on the side. As you watch the ritual unfold, you can't help but wonder, what would the liver say about your future? As you ponder the sheep's liver and what it might say about your future, your gaze turns skyward. Up there in the vast Babylonian night lies another kind of divine message. Yep, we're talking about the stars, those twinkling darts that have been humanity's celestial GPS since before anyone could say Big Dipper. Now, you might think stargazing is just for those with a penchant for poetry or a love of camping, but for the Babylonians, it was serious business. These ancient folks were starstruck in the most literal sense. They were among the earliest astronomers, watching the skies with an intensity that would make even the nerdiest telescope enthusiast blush. And why not? The heavens were a cosmic canvas, ripe for interpretation and wonder. Just as they read livers for divine messages, they believed the positions and movements of the stars and planets held the secrets of the gods. If you think horoscopes are a modern invention, guess again. The Babylonians were basically running the first celestial heartline, with the night sky serving as the original customer service center. But let's get concrete here. It's the 8th century BCE, and the Babylonians are already compiling star catalogs. They identified constellations, calculated the length of months, and even predicted solar and lunar eclipses with a precision that would make NASA nod in approval. Babylonian astronomers divided the sky into 12 zones, a precursor to our zodiac. They did this all without the aid of modern technology, just a keen eye, a sharp mind, and probably a lot of late nights. Their celestial observations weren't just stargazing for fun. Oh no, these efforts had real-world implications, particularly for the ruling class. Kings and priests sought astrological advice to make decisions about everything from agriculture to warfare. It's said that the fall of Nineveh in 612 BCE was foretold by a comet, a cosmic heads-up that things were about to go south. Imagine having that kind of celestial heads-up on your calendar app today. But let's not romanticize just yet. The reality behind these astral obsessions was both impressive and grueling. Observing the stars wasn't a simple matter of lying back and enjoying the view. It involved clambering up ziggurats, those massive, tiered structures that were part temple, part observatory, and all engineering marvel. Picture this, a ziggurat like Eremenenki, the legendary Tower of Babel, which was said to reach an impressive 7 stories high. That's roughly 90 meters, or about 300 feet for those keeping score in imperial units. Not exactly a casual climb. Building these monumental structures wasn't for the faint-hearted or the financially challenged. Constructing a ziggurat required a workforce that could fill a small town and a budget that could rival a blockbuster film. The bricks alone, millions of them, were made from mud and baked in the scorching Mesopotamian sun. And while these structures were divine in purpose, they were also political statements, giant markers of a king's power and piety. A ziggurat was as much about reaching the gods as it was about making a statement to earthly rivals. The labor required for these constructions was immense, and let's be honest, probably not fun. Imagine spending your days hauling mud bricks under the blazing sun, with the only reward being the knowledge that the gods might glance your way. The workforce was a mix of skilled artisans and conscripted laborers, often working under the watchful eyes of overseers. It was a society where the social hierarchy was as rigid as the bricks they laid. The king was at the top, the priests just below, and everyone else scrambling for a rung on the ladder. While the ziggurat served as an observatory and a place of worship, it was also a symbol of social order. The higher you went, literally and figuratively, the closer you were to the divine. Priests had exclusive access to the uppermost levels, where they carried out rituals and made celestial observations. Meanwhile, the average Babylonian looked up, both physically and metaphorically, to these towering structures. Now, let's tackle the myth of divine communication. The idea of priests having a hotline to the heavens is compelling, but the truth is more down to earth. Babylonian priests were the ultimate multitaskers, part astronomer, part mathematician, and part politician. They understood the patterns of the stars and used this knowledge to maintain their influence. By predicting eclipses or planetary movements, they could reinforce their authority, claiming divine insight while relying on empirical observation. It was a delicate balance of faith and science, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. So, the next time you gaze at the stars, remember that you're not just looking at celestial bodies. You're peeking into a world where those twinkling lights were as much about power and politics as they were about wonder. The Babylonians laid the groundwork for astronomy, but they also used the heavens to maintain earthly control. It's a reminder that the story of humanity is written not just in the stars, but in the mud bricks and sweat of those who reached for them. As you stand here, liver in one hand and eyes on the stars, you can't help but appreciate the intricate dance between the earthly and the divine, between aspiration and reality. And just like that, the curtain falls on the Babylonian night. But the story is far from over. There are more rituals to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more stars to gaze upon. After all, the Babylonians didn't just chart the stars. They charted our course through history, leaving behind a legacy as rich and complex as the constellations they revered. Stay tuned, because the cosmos has plenty more secrets to spill. As the Babylonian night draws to a close, we pivot from the cosmic ballet above to the earthy and scandalous rituals at ground level, into sacred prostitution, a term that sparks curiosity and raises eyebrows higher than a ziggurat. Now, before you conjure up images of sultry temple priestesses whispering sweet nothings to the gods, let's hit the brakes on that chariot of fantasy. Sacred prostitution in Babylon is one of those topics that has been romanticized and sensationalized more than a tabloid love affair. The truth is tangled in an ancient web of economics, social roles, and good old-fashioned human ambition. The practice was less about erotic devotion and more about economic necessity and social cohesion. So, let's cut through the incense smoke and get to the gritty details. First, a quick reality check. The idea that Babylonian women were lining up for a night of divine duty is mostly a myth. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, is often blamed for perpetuating this tale. He claimed every Babylonian woman had to sit in the temple of Ishtar and offer herself to a stranger at least once in her lifetime. Juicy as it sounds, historians today are skeptical. It's more likely that Herodotus, with his flair for storytelling, exaggerated to entertain his Greek audience. Now, let's explore what might have actually happened. Temples in Babylon were not just places of worship, they were economic powerhouses. These institutions owned land, lent money, and even engaged in trade. Think of them as the Swiss banks of the ancient world, but with more guards and fewer gold bars. The Temple of Ishtar, for instance, was a bustling hub of economic activity. It needed funds to maintain its lavish rituals and expansive properties. And here's where the concept of sacred prostitution sneaks in under the radar of divine propriety. It's likely that some form of ritualistic sex work was tied to the temple, but it wasn't the free-for-all Herodotus painted. Instead, it was a structured and economically driven practice. Women, likely devoted temple staff or priestesses, engaged in these rituals as part of their religious duties. The payments received weren't just tossed into a collection plate. They were critical for the temple's coffers, supporting not only the priests, but also the community projects managed by the temple. In essence, these transactions were the ancient world's way of crowdfunding public works. But why sex? Simple, fertility. This wasn't just about procreation, it was about prosperity, a vital concept in an agrarian society. The rituals were meant to invoke the favor of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, to bless the land with abundance. A bountiful harvest meant more than full bellies. It meant stability, trade, and growth. When you live in a world where one bad harvest could spell doom, you pull out all the stops, even if that means engaging in rituals that would make your modern HR department break out in a cold sweat. Let's look at some numbers to ground this in reality. Babylon, at its peak, was home to around 200,000 people, a sprawling metropolis by ancient standards. The temples, as economic engines, required a steady flow of income to function. Ritual sex work provided just that, along with other temple activities like lending and land leasing. This wasn't a world of free love. It was a world where every shekel counted. The economic angle doesn't just end at the temple steps. The practice of sacred prostitution also had social implications. It reinforced social hierarchies and gender roles, with women participating often being from lower economic backgrounds or families deeply tied to temple service. It was a system that, while exploitative, also offered a degree of power and influence within the rigid class structures of Babylon. These women, through their roles, could gain social standing and economic leverage, albeit within the confines of a male-dominated society. Now, let's not ignore the human element, the allure of the myth. The romanticized version of sacred prostitution has persisted because it taps into a narrative as old as time. The blending of the sacred and the sensual, the divine and the earthly. It's a narrative that captivates because it promises a glimpse into a world where the boundaries between the mundane and the mystical blur, where human desires intertwine with divine purpose. However, the harsh truth is that these practices were part of a complex socio-economic system that had little to do with romance and much to do with survival. The temples were as much about earthly power as they were about heavenly devotion. They wielded influence like a modern-day corporation, with a boardroom filled not with executives, but with priests and priestesses versed in the art of negotiation with both gods and men. So, when you strip away the layers of myth and legend, what do you find? A society grappling with the same issues we face today: economic disparity, social mobility, and the eternal quest for stability. The Babylonians may have wrapped these issues in the guise of sacred rituals, but at their core, they were driven by the same forces that drive us now: the need to survive and thrive in an uncertain world. In the end, sacred prostitution was not about debauchery or divine ecstasy. It was about making ends meet, maintaining social order, and ensuring the continuity of a civilization that stood at the crossroads of history. It's a reminder that behind every legend lies a tapestry of human experiences, woven together by the threads of necessity and ambition. As we close this chapter on Babylonian rituals, remember that the story is far from over. There are more tales to tell, more myths to unravel, and more truths to uncover. The past is a vast landscape, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface. So, stay tuned as we continue to peel back the layers of history, revealing the fascinating and often surprising realities of a world that, despite the gulf of time, is not so different from our own. Just when you thought Babylon couldn't get any more extravagant, along comes the Akiru festival to knock your sandals off. If you've ever thought New Year's Eve in Times Square was chaotic, wait until you hear about this ancient party. The Akiru festival was the Babylonian New Year celebration, and it made modern festivities look like a quiet night in with a cup of herbal tea. The Akiru festival was no one-night affair. Oh no, this was an 11-day extravaganza, and it required preparation that would make a royal wedding planner break out in a sweat. The festival took place in the spring during the month of Nisan, which corresponds roughly to our March or April, when the Tigris and Euphrates were more likely to stay in their banks. Nothing says Happy New Year like a bit of flood-free partying. The purpose of Akiru was twofold: to celebrate the agricultural bounty, and more importantly, to reinforce the king's divine mandate. Because, let's face it, nothing solidifies power like a good party. The king was not just the guy who happened to sit on the fanciest chair. He was seen as the earthly representative of the gods. And if you're the king, you want to make sure everyone knows you're still the big cheese. So, how did this Babylonian blowout unfold? Well, the festival kicked off with the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth. Think of it as the opening act, setting the stage with a tale of cosmic battles and divine drama. The priests would chant this epic, which probably lasted longer than your favorite director's cut of a Hollywood blockbuster. It was a reminder of the divine order and the king's role in maintaining it, a narrative that was both awe-inspiring and politically savvy. Now, let's talk logistics, because this wasn't just a bunch of people milling about. The Akiru festival involved elaborate processions, sacrifices, and ceremonies that required meticulous planning. Imagine organizing an event with thousands of attendees, multiple venues, and a schedule tighter than a pair of skinny jeans. The main stage was the Temple of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. The statue of Marduk, which stood about 4 meters tall, was paraded through the city, a bit like the world's first celebrity sighting. The king would humble himself before Marduk's statue, removing his royal insignia and confessing any misdeeds, not unlike a political apology tour, but with more incense and less media scrutiny. But don't think the king was out of the spotlight for long. The highlight of the festival was the reenactment of the divine assembly, where the king symbolically took his place among the gods. This wasn't just theater, it was political maneuvering wrapped in divine drama. It was a reminder to all that the king's power was sanctioned by the cosmos itself. And let's not forget the economic impact of all this revelry. The Akiru festival was a boon for the Babylonian economy, creating jobs and boosting trade. Artisans crafted elaborate costumes and decorations, and farmers provided the sacrificial animals and food. The festival was a giant economic engine, spinning the wheels of commerce as surely as it spun the myths that legitimized the king's rule. But here's where we start to peel back the layers of myth. It's tempting to romanticize the Akiru festival as an ancient utopia of harmony and prosperity. In reality, it was a carefully orchestrated spectacle, a tool of royal propaganda designed to reinforce social hierarchies and political power. The king's public humility was a strategic maneuver, a way to reaffirm his authority by showing that he, too, was subject to the divine order. The festival also served as a means of social cohesion, bringing together people from all walks of life in a shared experience. It was a time when the city's rigid class divisions softened, if only temporarily, under the unifying banner of celebration. But let's not kid ourselves. Once the festivities ended, it was back to the grind, with the king and the elite firmly in control. The Akiru festival highlights a universal truth about human societies: the power of narrative and spectacle to shape perception and maintain control. The Babylonians were masters of this art, using myth and ritual to bind their society together and keep the wheels of power turning. It's a lesson as relevant today as it was in ancient Babylon. As the festival concluded, the city returned to its daily rhythms, but the echoes of Akiru lingered. The rituals and sacrifices, the chants and processions, all served to remind the Babylonians of their place in the cosmic order. It was a world where the divine and the earthly were intertwined, where the king's power was both a gift from the gods and a carefully crafted performance. So, as we wrap up this glimpse into the Akiru festival, remember that beneath the glamour and grandeur lay a complex web of politics, economics, and social dynamics. The Babylonians were not just celebrating a new year. They were affirming their identity and reinforcing the structures that held their civilization together. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human ambition, creativity, and resilience. And with that, our journey through the Akiru festival draws to a close. But don't worry, there's plenty more Babylonian intrigue to unravel. So, keep your eyes on the horizon, because the story of Babylon is far from over. And so, as we draw the velvet curtain over our whirlwind tour of Babylonian rituals, let's take a step back and see how these eccentric customs stitched together the vibrant tapestry of ancient Babylonian society. These weren't just isolated traditions. Oh no, they were the lifeblood of a civilization, pulsing through its cultural, political, and economic veins. Think of them as the quirky yet essential building blocks of a grand empire. First, consider the economic engine driving these practices. Babylon wasn't just a city. It was a financial powerhouse. The rituals we've explored, from the Akiru festival to the enigmatic sacred prostitution, were deeply entwined with the economy. They weren't just spiritual affairs. They were big business, baby. The temples, like the mighty ziggurat of Marduk, weren't only religious sanctuaries. They were economic juggernauts, owning land, conducting trade, and even extending credit. Picture a mashup of Wall Street, a cathedral, and an ancient farmer's market, all under one sun-baked roof. But let's not gloss over the political dynamics at play. These rituals were as much about maintaining power as they were about appeasing the gods. The Babylonian king, strutting his stuff during the Akiru festival or consulting with a haruspex, wasn't just a figurehead. He was a political maestro, conducting a symphony of divine legitimacy and earthly authority. The king's public displays of humility, like confessing before Marduk, were calculated moves to solidify his grip on power. It's a tale as old as time. Nothing says, "I'm in charge," like a little public groveling mixed with a whole lot of divine endorsement. And let's talk social cohesion, because these rituals weren't just for the elite. They were communal experiences that brought together Babylonians from all walks of life. Whether it was the communal festivities of the Akiru or the collective participation in temple economies, these rituals created a shared identity. They were the glue that held the social fabric together, reinforcing hierarchies while also offering a sense of belonging. It's like your hometown parade, but with more incense and celestial mandates. Yet behind this grand tapestry lies a more somber tale. The myth of divine communication, whether through liver divination or celestial observations, was often a tool of control. Priests and kings wielded these rituals like a double-edged sword, blending genuine faith with shrewd political calculation. Sure, they sought divine favor, but they also knew how to play the crowd. It's a delicate dance between belief and manipulation, a reminder that power often hides behind the veil of piety. But let's not just leave it there. Fast forward to today, and you'll find echoes of Babylonian ingenuity and ambition all around us. The very concept of reading the stars, honed by Babylonian astronomers, laid the groundwork for modern astronomy. They mapped constellations and predicted eclipses with a precision that would earn them a standing ovation at any scientific conference today. Their legacy. Every time you check a weather forecast or marvel at a space launch, you're nodding to those ancient stargazers who dared to look up and wonder. Even our modern economics owe a nod to Babylon. The temple as a financial hub isn't so different from today's financial institutions, minus the sacrifices, of course. The idea of credit, trade, and economic management has roots that twist back to those bustling Babylonian streets, and who knew that ancient sheep livers could be the precursor to modern financial forecasting. Okay, maybe not quite, but the spirit of seeking knowledge to gain an edge is timeless. And let's not forget the art of political theater, perfected by Babylonian kings during the Akiru festival. Today's political spectacles, from grand inaugurations to international summits, owe a debt to those ancient kings who turned public performance into a fine art. The message then, as now, was clear. Power is as much about perception as it is about governance. In wrapping up our journey through Babylonian rituals, we're left with a portrait of a society that, while ancient, resonates with modern themes. The Babylonians were masters of blending the sacred with the practical, the divine with the mundane. Their rituals were not just quaint customs, but vital threads in the fabric of their civilization. So, as you ponder the strange yet familiar echoes of Babylon today, remember that history is not just a dusty record of bygone days. It's a living narrative, a guidebook filled with triumphs and follies, wisdom and whimsy. The Babylonians may be long gone, but their legacy lives on, entwined in the very structure of our world, reminding us that in the dance of history we are never truly alone. And with that, dear friends, we've come full circle, much like the stars, much like history itself. So keep your eyes open and your mind curious, because the past always has more stories to tell. You're standing in the chilly embrace of late October, somewhere in the rugged terrain of ancient Celtic lands. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and the distant, almost hypnotic rhythm of drums. This is Samhain, and you're about to experience New Year's Eve as it was meant to be. A chaotic, fiery, spirit-filled festival that makes today's celebrations look like a book club meeting. Let's talk bonfires. When it comes to size, the Celts didn't believe in moderation. We're talking about bonfires large enough to toast marshmallows from another county. With a flick of a flint, these towering infernos were ignited to not just light up the night, but to welcome the spirits of the other world and perhaps keep them at a respectful distance. It's a 2-for-1 deal. Light up the night and ward off anything that goes bump in it. Now, you might be thinking, why the obsession with fire? Well, for the Celts, fire wasn't just a source of warmth, it was a beacon of protection. As you watch the flames leap skyward, you can't help but marvel at how these people managed to turn fear into festivity. They believed that during Samhain, the veil between the living and the dead was as thin as that time you wore your summer clothes in a winter storm. The spirits, both friendly and fiendish, were thought to roam among the living, and frankly, who wouldn't want to keep an eye on that kind of guest list? Let's not forget the costumes. You're not just a spectator here, you're part of the show. The Celts were all about blending in with the spirit world, and that meant donning costumes. We're talking about animal skins and heads, think more wild animal and less off-the-rack Halloween store. It was practical and intimidating, a fashion statement that said, I'm not afraid of you, and also I might eat grass. There's a certain charm to this method of spirit camouflage. It's like the ultimate game of hide and seek, but with higher stakes and more fur. And here's where it gets cheekily modern, the origins of trick-or-treating. As you might have guessed, the Celts weren't big on candy corn. Instead, they relied on the tried-and-true method of food offerings to appease wandering spirits. Families left out portions of their harvest to satisfy the otherworldly travelers. This wasn't just a gesture of goodwill, it was practical too. After all, who wants a poltergeist haunting their pantry because they forgot to leave out a bushel of apples? You can almost hear the echoes of gallows humor as you stand among these ancient revelers. There's a practical joke in there somewhere, a darkly humorous acknowledgement of death's inevitability, wrapped up in an evening of feasting and festivities. It's a bit like inviting your worst fears to dinner and then laughing with them over a pint. But here's the kicker. Despite the eerie overtones, Samhain was fundamentally about community. Picture this. You're not just fending off spirits. You're reconnecting with your ancestors, your neighbors, and yes, even that one cousin who insists on playing with fire a bit too enthusiastically. It's a time when the living and the dead converge, and for one night, everyone is welcome at the party, provided they don't mind a little soot and a lot of noise. While the modern world often romanticizes the past, let's not forget the gritty realities. The Celts lived in a world where superstition and pragmatism were as intertwined as their intricate knotwork designs. They didn't have the luxury of dismissing otherworldly threats as mere myth. In a time when the unexplained could easily be attributed to the displeasure of a spirit, Samhain was as much a survival tactic as it was a celebration. As the night wears on, and the bonfire's glow begins to wane, you find yourself contemplating the delicate dance between fear and festivity. The Celts knew how to throw a party, but they also knew how to respect the mysteries of the universe. It's a balance that feels oddly familiar, even in today's world. So, as you stand there, surrounded by a community bonded by fire and tradition, you realize that sometimes the best way to face the unknown is with a costume and a killer sense of humor. As the embers of the barn fire flicker and fade, we turn our gaze from the fiery festivities of Samhain to something a bit more, shall we say, head-turning, Celtic headhunting. Now, before you picture Braveheart-style warriors with heads dangling from their belts like gruesome keychains, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of this ancient practice. Spoiler alert, it's less a horror movie and more a psychological thriller. The Celts had a bit of a reputation, and not just for their fire festivals. Roman historians, those delightful purveyors of dramatic tales, loved to paint the Celts as wild barbarians. Tacitus, for instance, wasn't shy about embellishing. According to him, the Celts were a headhunting bunch, collecting noggins like some folks collect stamps. But let's pause before buying into this Roman tabloid fodder. While the Celts did indeed take heads, it wasn't just about one-upmanship or interior decorating. These heads were believed to hold supernatural power, acting as a direct line to the gods or a way to harness the enemy's strength. Imagine thinking of a severed head as a spiritual Wi-Fi connection. Archaeological digs have unearthed some fascinating artifacts, like skulls neatly arranged in shrines or mounted on stakes. This wasn't just a gruesome display of victory. It was an offering to the divine and a powerful message to both foes and friends. In a world where survival often depended on how effectively you could intimidate your rivals, a few strategically placed skulls could do wonders. It's like the ancient equivalent of a "beware of dog" sign, but with much higher stakes and possibly more effective. But let's not overlook the PR campaign orchestrated by the Romans. Theirs was a world of politics and propaganda, and they had a vested interest in making the Celts look as savage as possible. Roman soldiers returning with tales of headhunting Celts made for great stories back home, conveniently justifying their own conquests. If you're going to invade someone's land, it helps if you can convince everyone they're the bad guys. So, while there's truth to the headhunting tales, take the Romans' word with a grain of salt, or maybe a whole salt lick. Now, why heads? Well, the Celts believed the head was the seat of the soul and the essence of one's being. It was the part of you that yelled Eureka, or plotted your neighbor's downfall. Capturing an enemy's head was akin to capturing their spirit, a way to ensure they wouldn't be haunting you from beyond the grave. Plus, in an era with no Instagram to flaunt your victories, a trophy head was a pretty clear status update. However, the practical side of this gory practice shouldn't be ignored. In a society where warfare was almost as common as rain in Ireland, the psychological impact of headhunting was immense. Facing an enemy who might add your noggin to their collection was a deterrent on its own. It was psychological warfare at its rawest, a tactic that was less about collecting heads and more about keeping your own firmly attached. Of course, not everyone was a fan of this tradition. Even among the Celts, there were those who saw it as a bit gauche. Yet, in a world where every village had its own customs and beliefs, the headhunters were just one thread in a rich tapestry of Celtic life. They were a culture in flux, caught between the mysticism of their traditions and the harsh realities of survival. Their headhunting, then, was not just a religious or cultural act, it was a strategic one, woven into the very fabric of their society. As you mull over the Celts' penchant for head collecting, consider this. In their world, where gods and spirits were as real as the earth beneath their feet, the practice made a kind of sense. It was about power, respect, and a touch of the mystical. And while it's easy to judge from our modern vantage point, remember that in a time of constant warfare, a little intimidation could go a long way. So, as you mentally step back from the bloody battlefield and its cranial trophies, ponder this. How much of what we know is shaped by those who wrote history, and how much is left to the echoes of the past, waiting to be uncovered? The Celts, with their headhunting and barnfires, offer us a glimpse into a world where the lines between myth and reality blur. And as we peel back the layers of legend and fact, we find a story that is as much about the human condition as it is about the past. So, as we peel back the layers of Celtic history, it's time to put down the severed heads and pick up something a little more heartwarming, or at least as heartwarming as ancient Celtic relationships can get. Welcome to the world of hand-fasting, a practice that's 1 part romance, 2 parts practicality, and a sprinkle of legal cunning. This was the Celts' version of a trial marriage, and it was refreshingly progressive, even if it wasn't all rainbows and druids. Picture this. Without the severed heads, please. You're standing in a field, surrounded by your closest kin and maybe a few chickens, Because why not? You and your beloved are about to tie the knot, quite literally, and fasting involved wrapping the couple's hands together with a cord or ribbon, symbolizing their union. It's like saying, I do, with a side of macrame. Unlike modern weddings that can cost as much as a small country's GDP, this was an affair built on simplicity and the community spirit. Now, let's talk numbers. In a time when dowries were a thing, the economic implications of marriage were as complex as a Celtic knot. A dowry wasn't just a gift, it was an investment. The bride's family often provided a dowry to the groom's family, which could include livestock, land, or precious metals. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a prenup, but with more cows. And while it sounds transactional, because it was, this practice also provided a safety net for the woman should things go south faster than a Celtic chariot on a downhill sprint. But here's where the Celts really broke the mold. Hand fasting was essentially a trial run. You could say it was like the ancient version of try before you buy, except you're not buying a car, you're testing out a lifelong partnership. The typical duration of a hand fasting was a year and a day. After this period, the couple could choose to make the union permanent or call it quits with no hard feelings. Cue the collective sigh of relief from commitment phobes everywhere. While this might sound like a modern marriage hack, it was rooted in practicality. The Celts understood that life was unpredictable, and committing for eternity was a big ask, especially when eternity could be cut short by a bad harvest or a rival clan's sudden interest in your territory. The flexibility of hand fasting allowed for adjustments based on life's ever-changing circumstances. And let's not gloss over the divorce rights. Yes, Celts had divorce, and women had a say in it. If the trial period wasn't all moonlit nights and bardic serenades, women could initiate a split. This was a society where women could hold property and had legal standing, a fact that might make you wonder if the Celts were secretly running a progressive utopia while everyone else was still figuring out fire. Okay, maybe not a utopia, more like a practical, no-nonsense society that understood life's complexities. But before we get too charmed by this ancient arrangement, let's not forget the societal pressures. Marriage, trial or not, was a serious affair. It wasn't just about love. It was about alliances, land, and the continuation of family lines. A failed hand fasting could mean more than just a broken heart. It could disrupt clan ties and create political ripples. The personal was political long before that phrase became a rallying cry. So, how does this ancient practice trickle down to modern times? Well, ever been to a wedding where the couple ties a cord or ribbon around their hands? That's hand fasting, making a comeback like vinyl records and flared jeans. It's a nod to tradition, a way to blend the old with the new, even if the couples today aren't planning to reassess their commitment after a year. Although, given current divorce rates, maybe they should. In the end, the Celts teach us that love and marriage have always been a blend of the romantic and the practical. Their hand fasting wasn't just a ceremony, it was a reflection of their worldview, a world where flexibility and pragmatism were key to survival. As you let this ancient wisdom sink in, consider how much of modern love is wrapped in tradition, and how much is, like the Celts, a negotiation between heart and head. As we leave the hand-fasted couples contemplating their year and a day of commitment, remember, the Celts weren't just about fire and fury. They were a culture that valued the complexities of human relationships. So next time you witness a wedding ritual that seems steeped in mystery, give a nod to the Celts, those ancient romantics with a practical twist. And who knows, maybe that ribbon around your friend's wrists is more than just a decorative flourish. It's a thread connecting us to a time when love was as much about survival as it was about sentiment. Now, let's turn our focus to the enigmatic Druids, the original influencers of the ancient Celtic world. These are the folks who would have had more followers than a modern-day TikTok star, minus the dance challenges and questionable life hacks. The Druids have been painted as everything from mystical sages to political powerhouses. But were they really the Gandalf-like figures of Celtic lore, or is that just some top-notch ancient PR? Let's dig in and see what separates the myth from the reality. First off, if you think that Druidism was just another word for tree-hugging, think again. While the Druids were certainly fans of nature, trees and all, they were also the intellectual elite. They were the priests, judges, teachers and advisors, a jack-of-all-trades class that wielded significant influence. Julius Caesar, that old Roman raconteur, gave us some of the earliest accounts of Druids. According to him, these guys were not only in charge of religious ceremonies, but also played a crucial role in the legal and educational systems of the Celts. Imagine a society where the same person could marry you, teach your children, and settle your property disputes. Talk about multitasking. Caesar, never one for understatement, described the Druids as a sort of Celtic Jedi council, meeting annually at the sacred site of Carnutes in Gaul. Whether or not they actually used mind tricks to influence their followers is up for debate, but their hold on Celtic society was undeniable. They were the gatekeepers of knowledge in a world where literacy was as rare as a unicorn sighting. And in a culture that valued oral tradition, their memory was their superpower. They could recite histories, laws, and genealogies like a human Wikipedia, all without the need for a Wi-Fi connection or a data plan. But let's not get too enchanted by the mystical allure. The economic and political power of the Druids was as real as the chill of a Celtic winter. They were exempt from taxes and military service, which meant they had the freedom to focus on their spiritual and educational pursuits. This tax-free status was like having a golden ticket in a society where resources were scarce, and every able-bodied person was expected to contribute to the clan's survival. In essence, the Druids were the ultimate insiders in the Celtic social hierarchy, masters of both the spiritual and the temporal realms. Of course, with great power comes great responsibility, or at least a healthy dose of fear. The Druids were revered, yes, but they were also feared. Their ability to curse or bless, to heal or harm, made them both allies and adversaries. They were the arbiters of justice, and their decisions could mean life or death. Imagine having your fate decided by someone who might also be moonlighting as your village spiritual guide. It adds a whole new layer of meaning to the phrase judge, jury, and executioner. Now, let's sprinkle in a pinch of irony. While the Druids were seen as the wise sages of their day, their power also made them targets. When the Romans marched into Celtic lands, one of their first orders of business was to dismantle the Druids' influence. Why? Because controlling the Druids meant controlling the Celts. In a world where divine right and spiritual authority were intertwined, removing the Druids was like pulling the plug on the Celtic power grid. It was a political move as much as it was a military one. Archaeological evidence lends some weight to both the legend and the reality of Druidic influence. Sites like Anglesey in Wales and the aforementioned Carnutes in Gaul serve as tangible links to their past presence. But the artifacts are scant, and much of what we know about Druids comes filtered through the lens of Roman writers, who weren't exactly unbiased observers. It's like reading a tabloid article about a celebrity feud. Entertaining, sure, but perhaps not the whole truth. So, were the Druids the wise, mystical sages of legend, or just savvy operators with a knack for branding and a monopoly on ancient knowledge? The answer, like most things in history, isn't black and white. They were as complex as the society they served, a blend of the mystical and the practical, wielding power that was both revered and feared. They were the original influencers, shaping the culture and beliefs of their time in ways that still echo today. As we untangle the knots of Druidic lore, it's clear that their influence was as much about perception as it was about reality. They were the embodiment of Celtic spirituality and intellect, figures who navigated the murky waters of power with a deftness that would make any modern politician envious. So next time you hear someone talking about Druids as nothing but mystical tree whisperers, remember, they were much more than that. They were the architects of Celtic society, weaving together the spiritual and the temporal in a way that left a lasting legacy. And as we prepare to delve deeper into the world of the Celts, keep in mind that the lines between myth and reality are often as blurred as the boundaries between the worlds the Druids themselves traversed. And speaking of blurred boundaries, let's paint a picture of the Celts through the lens of their art, a compelling visual language that spoke louder than words, especially since most Celts were about as literate as your average garden gnome. Celtic art wasn't just a splash of pretty patterns. It was a complex tapestry of identity, power, and a little bit of don't mess with us flair. So, let's dive into this colorful world where every swirl and knot had a story to tell. First off, let's talk about those famous Celtic knots. You've seen them on everything from tattoo parlors to Pinterest boards, but these weren't just doodles done during a boring tribal meeting. These mesmerizing loops were symbols of eternity, continuity, and the interconnectedness of life. And while they might look like they'd fit right into a modern mindfulness app, back in the day, they were far more than decorative Zen. Picture them as the ancient equivalent of a brand logo, a way for tribes to mark territory and assert identity without needing to resort to the messy business of headhunting. Now, if you think Celtic art was all swirls and no substance, think again. The Celts were masters of what we might call visual propaganda. Their art was a savvy blend of the sacred and the strategic. Take, for example, the Latin style, named after the site in Switzerland where a treasure trove of Celtic artifacts was discovered. Beginning around 450 BCE, this style was all about intricate metalwork and curvilinear motifs, creating pieces that were as much about showing off wealth and power as they were about aesthetic appeal. Think of it as the ancient Celtic equivalent of owning a Tesla. Sure, it gets you from point A to B, but it also tells your neighbors you're doing just fine, thank you very much. And let's not forget the animals. Celtic art loved a good beast, from the majestic stag to the enigmatic serpent. These creatures weren't just whimsical additions, they were packed with symbolism. The boar might represent courage and strength, and let's face it, a bit of stubbornness, while the hare might symbolize fertility and abundance. Imagine wearing a piece of jewelry that says, "I'm brave, I'm bountiful, and I've got a boar to prove it." It was art as a personal resume, with each animal carefully chosen to communicate the wearer's aspirations or achievements. But here's where we peel back the romanticized veneer. While the Celts are often portrayed as nature-loving artisans, their art was as much about asserting dominance as it was about celebrating nature. Those elaborate shields and helmets weren't just for show, they were designed to intimidate opponents on the battlefield. The next time you admire a Celtic torque, that iconic neck ring, remember it was more than a fashion statement. It was a badge of honor, often awarded to warriors for bravery. A torque said more than "I have style." It said, "I've seen battle, and I've come out on top." Economically, the Celts were savvy traders, with their art playing a crucial role in commerce. Celtic craftsmen were in high demand across Europe, their goods sought after by everyone from the Greeks to the Romans. These ornate pieces weren't just cultural exports, they were economic powerhouses, driving trade networks that stretched from Ireland to the Mediterranean. The flowing designs and intricate metalwork weren't just expressions of artistic genius, they were currency in a world where art was as valuable as gold. Celtic art also served as a unifying force within a culture that was as varied as it was vibrant. With dozens of tribes spread across a vast landscape, maintaining a cohesive identity was no small feat. This is where art came in, weaving a common thread through the tapestry of Celtic life. Whether it was the shared motifs of knotwork or the ubiquitous spiral patterns, these designs helped to bind the Celts together, creating a sense of unity that transcended tribal rivalries. But let's not ignore the strategic messaging here. Celtic art was a silent yet powerful form of communication, conveying messages of power, identity, and resilience. It was the original social media, broadcasting to both friend and foe a narrative of strength and sophistication. Celts understood the power of perception long before the first Roman chronicler picked up a stylus. They knew that a well-crafted image could sway opinions, build alliances, and deter enemies. In a world where war and diplomacy were two sides of the same coin, art was a weapon as effective as any sword. So, as we wrap up our exploration of Celtic traditions, let's step back and admire the legacy they left behind. From bonfires to headhunters, from handfasting to druids, and now, through their art, the Celts offer us a window into a world that was as enigmatic as it was enduring. They were a people who balanced mysticism with pragmatism, who saw beauty in the mundane and power in the visual. They were artists and warriors, philosophers and farmers, a society that wove together the practical and the poetic in a way that still resonates today. As you absorb the tapestry of Celtic life, remember that history isn't just a litany of facts and dates. It's a story of human experience, rich with complexity and contradiction. The Celts, with their intricate art and layered traditions, remind us that the past is never as simple as it seems. It's a narrative woven from the threads of myth and reality, each strand a testament to the enduring human spirit. So the next time you see a Celtic knot, Let it remind you of this intricate dance of culture and history, a symbol of a people who knew that true power lies not just in the sword, but in the stories we tell and the art we leave behind. And as we close this chapter on the Celts, consider how their legacy continues to shape our world. From the symbols we wear to the stories we tell, their influence is woven into the fabric of modern life. So, whether you're standing in a museum, admiring a piece of Celtic art, or simply tying a ribbon around your wrist, let it serve as a reminder of the rich tapestry of human history, a tapestry that's as complex, colorful, and captivating as the culture that created it. In their art and their traditions, the Celts left us more than artifacts. They left us a legacy of resilience, creativity, and a deep understanding of the human condition. And that, my friends, is a story worth telling. Cleisthenes was probably the kind of kid who played chess while everyone else was stuck on tic-tac-toe. Born into the Alcmeonidae family, one of the ritzier clans in Athens, he had a front-row seat to the political circus of late 6th century BCE Greece. His family wasn't just any old aristocracy. They were the creme de la creme, though with a bit more drama than your average soap opera. Picture this, a family that was as skilled at power plays as they were at hosting lavish banquets. And Cleisthenes, well, he was their rising star, destined to make waves in the political tide pool of Athens. But before we dive into Cleisthenes' early years, let's set the scene. Late 6th century, Athens was a bit like your high school cafeteria if it were run by Machiavelli. This was a time when political power was less about democratic ideals and more about who could outmaneuver whom. The city-state was a hotbed of intrigue and backstabbing, with tyrants, aristocrats, and the occasional philosopher all vying for control. It was like Game of Thrones, but with togas instead of dragons. Enter Pisistratus, the man who could give any modern politician a run for their money in terms of sheer audacity. This guy managed to seize power not once, not twice, but thrice. His initial coup in 561 BCE was a masterclass in political theater. He faked an attack on himself, demanded a bodyguard, and then used that very guard to seize the Acropolis. Talk about a plot twist. Pisistratus' reign was marked by a kind of benevolent tyranny. He was the sort of ruler who'd smile as he taxed you, then use that money to build temples in your name. Under his rule, Athens enjoyed peace and prosperity, which, not coincidentally, kept the citizens from asking too many questions about who was actually pulling the strings. Now, the Alcmeonidae family had a bit of a rocky start with Pisistratus. They were exiled, but not ones to cry over spilt ouzo. They bided their time. This family had a knack for bouncing back, and after Pisistratus' death in 527 BCE, they saw their chance. His sons, Hippias and Hipparchus, took over, but they lacked their father's finesse. They were more like the B-team of tyranny, which made them ripe for a good old-fashioned overthrow. Cleisthenes, meanwhile, was busy honing his political chops. He was like the Athenian version of a political wonderkind, watching the power struggles unfold like a reality TV show, taking notes for his future reforms. His early years were a crash course in political survival, surrounded by family members who were either plotting comebacks or scheming to maintain their grip on power. It was a world where alliances were as fragile as the pottery they drank their wine from, and Cleisthenes had to be nimble to navigate it. So, what was Cleisthenes' big break? It came in the form of another tyrant, Hippias. By 510 BCE, the Athenians had had enough of his heavy-handed rule. With a little help from their frenemies, the Spartans, they managed to oust Hippias, sending him packing to Persia. This left a power vacuum, and Cleisthenes saw his moment. He was like a political surfer catching the perfect wave, ready to ride it all the way to reform. Now, you might be thinking that Cleisthenes just waltzed in and everyone handed him the keys to the city. Not quite. His path was more like a twisty mountain road, filled with hairpin turns and the occasional landslide. The Alcmeonidae were still viewed with suspicion by many Athenians, thanks to a little incident called the Cylonian conspiracy. Back in the day, their ancestors had been accused of sacrilege for murdering followers of Cylon, a would-be tyrant, after they'd taken refuge at a temple. This act was like a bad credit rating, following the family for generations. But Cleisthenes was nothing if not strategic. He knew that to win over the people, he had to offer them something irresistible. So he pitched the idea of democracy, not the polished, idealistic version we think of today, but a rough-and-tumble system where power was spread out among the citizens. And this wasn't just a political move. It was a masterstroke in PR. Cleisthenes was offering every Athenian a share in the game, and who could resist that? To pull this off, Cleisthenes had to outmaneuver another aristocrat, Isagoras. Think of Isagoras as the guy who always gets too competitive at board games, flipping the table when things don't go his way. He had the backing of the Spartans, who had their own ideas about who should run Athens. But Cleisthenes played the long game. He rallied the support of the people, leveraging their discontent and desire for change. In 508 BCE, Cleisthenes executed his reform plan, essentially rearranging Athens' political landscape like a giant game of Risk. He reorganized the Athenian citizens into 10 tribes, each drawn from different regions of Attica. This was like mixing paint colors to create something vibrant and new, breaking down old power blocks and ensuring that no single region could dominate. He also established the Council of 500, a group of citizens chosen by lot to propose laws, making governance more representative. Cleisthenes' reforms were revolutionary, turning Athens into a model of citizen participation. It was a bold experiment, and while it didn't solve all of Athens' problems, politics being what they are, some things never change. It laid the groundwork for what would become one of the first known democracies. It was a risky move, akin to flipping the script in an epic saga, but it paid off, earning Cleisthenes the title of Father of Athenian Democracy. So there you have it. Cleisthenes, the man who rose from the chaos of late 6th century Athens, using his aristocratic background and sharp political instincts to navigate the treacherous waters of power. A real-life chess master in a world full of tic-tac-toe players. And all of this was just the beginning of his story. But for now, picture him standing atop the political mountain, basking in his hard-won victory, as the seeds of democracy began to take root in the rocky soil of Athens. The story of Cleisthenes doesn't end with him basking in glory atop the political mountain. No, this is where it gets interesting. Like an encore at a rock concert, where the band plays the hit everyone's been waiting for. But instead of guitar riffs, we have the Oracle of Delphi, a religious powerhouse wielding influence that modern politicians could only dream of. Picture a hotline to the gods, which, if used correctly, could sway public opinion faster than a viral tweet. Now, let's talk about the oracle's role in Cleisthenes' ascent. In 510 BCE, the Alcmeonidae family, Cleisthenes' clan, seized a golden opportunity. They funded the reconstruction of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. This wasn't just a generous gesture. It was a tactical move straight out of a political playbook. By investing in this sacred site, they didn't just earn the oracle's goodwill. They essentially turned Delphi into their own PR firm, with Apollo's priestess as the spokesperson. Why does this matter? Well, let's dive into ancient Greek belief systems. The oracle wasn't just a mystical curiosity. She was the ultimate influencer of the ancient world. Kings, tyrants, and city-states all sought her counsel. When she spoke, it was as if the gods themselves had weighed in. So, when word got out that the oracle had a thing for Cleisthenes and his family, it was like getting a celebrity endorsement in an age when divine favor was the gold standard of legitimacy. And here's the kicker. The oracle reportedly told the Spartans to support Cleisthenes. Yes, the same Spartans who were more known for their abs and spears than their diplomatic acumen. Normally, the Athenians and Spartans were like oil and water, but the oracle's prophecy was like a divine matchmaking service. The Spartans, ever the dutiful followers of religious decrees, decided to intervene in Athenian politics. Their support was crucial in ousting Hippias, the tyrant who had overstayed his welcome. It was a classic case of my enemy's enemy is my friend, with a divine twist. With the Spartans and the oracle on his side, Cleisthenes was playing 3D chess while everyone else was still trying to figure out the rules of checkers. He expertly leveraged religious influence to rally support against the entrenched tyranny of Hippias. The Spartans, though, didn't quite get the memo about democracy, and were not thrilled when Cleisthenes started implementing his radical reforms. They envisioned a more traditional aristocratic setup, something they could relate to while polishing their helmets. But Cleisthenes had already laid the groundwork for his democratic coup. He cleverly combined religious influence, strategic alliances, and the people's desire for change to secure his position. It was a bit like threading a needle while riding a horse at full gallop, but he pulled it off. Cleisthenes' astute maneuvering showcased his knack for turning potential obstacles into stepping stones. As Cleisthenes pushed forward with his reforms, the political landscape of Athens began to shift dramatically. He understood that to truly change the system, he had to break the old power structures and create something new. This wasn't just about passing laws, it was about reshaping society itself. And Cleisthenes had a plan as intricate as a spider's web. One of his bold moves was the reorganization of citizens into 10 new tribes, or phylae. This was a stroke of genius. By creating tribes that mixed the city's population from different regions, Cleisthenes effectively dismantled the old aristocratic power bases. It was like shuffling a deck of cards to ensure no one player held all the aces. Each tribe was a microcosm of Athenian society, representing the diverse interests of the city-state. This reorganization was about more than just political power. It was about identity. Cleisthenes understood that if people began to see themselves as Athenians first, rather than members of a particular clan or region, it would foster unity and cooperation. It was a bit like rebranding a company, but instead of a new logo, he gave Athens a new sense of self. And let's not forget the Council of 500. This was Cleisthenes' piece de resistance, a governing body composed of representatives from each tribe. The council had the power to propose laws and oversee the administration of the city. It was a bold experiment in participatory government and laid the groundwork for future democratic practices. For the first time, ordinary citizens had a voice in how their city was run. It's like giving everyone a vote on the company board, rather than just the shareholders. But of course, Cleisthenes' reforms weren't without their challenges. Not everyone was on board with this radical transformation. There were those who preferred the old ways, where power was concentrated in the hands of a few. Cleisthenes had to navigate this resistance with the skill of a tightrope walker. He had to balance the desires of the people with the vested interests of the aristocracy, all while keeping an eye on the ever-watchful Spartans. This political dance showcased Cleisthenes' ability to adapt and innovate. He was a pragmatist at heart, willing to make concessions and compromises when necessary. But he never lost sight of his ultimate goal, to create a system of governance that empowered the citizens of Athens. It was a vision that would reverberate through history, influencing political thought for centuries to come. Cleisthenes' rise to power was a testament to his political acumen and strategic foresight. He understood that true change required more than just a shift in leadership. It demanded a complete overhaul of the system itself. By leveraging religious influence, forging alliances, and implementing bold reforms, he transformed Athens from a city-state dominated by tyrants to a beacon of democratic ideals. And so, as Cleisthenes stood on the precipice of this new political era, he must have felt a sense of satisfaction. His journey had been fraught with challenges and obstacles, but he had emerged victorious. The seeds of democracy he planted would take root and flourish, shaping the future of Athens and inspiring generations to come. But this was only the beginning of his story. There were still battles to be fought and challenges to overcome. Cleisthenes had set the stage for a new chapter in Athenian history, and the world was watching to see what would happen next. Cleisthenes' journey was just gaining momentum, like a political roller coaster clicking its way to the top, ready for a thrilling descent. The heart of his reforms lay in the radical restructuring of Athens into demes, which were essentially the building blocks of his new democracy. Picture Athens as a pie, and Cleisthenes slicing it into 139 demes, a move that would make even the most seasoned pastry chef raise an eyebrow. This wasn't just a culinary exercise, though. Each deme was a small local community with its own government, a bit like mini-republics, and they were the pulse of his democratic experiment. Why demes, you ask? Well, Cleisthenes understood that power tended to clump together like mashed potatoes, often in the hands of a few aristocratic families. So, by dividing Athens into these smaller units, he was able to disperse political power more evenly across the citizenry. It was like taking a game of Monopoly, where one player owns all the hotels, and redistributing those properties so everyone had a shot at boardwalk. The idea was to prevent any one group from hogging the spotlight, creating a more balanced system where every citizen had a voice, or at least a chance to shout over the din. Cleisthenes' reorganization didn't just shuffle citizens around like a deck of cards. It also introduced a novel concept of identity. Each Athenian was now linked to a deme rather than their familial lineage. It was a bit like swapping out your last name for a street address. It changed how you saw yourself and your place in the civic landscape. This shift helped to break down the old, entrenched power structures and encouraged people to think of themselves as part of a broader collective. It was social engineering on a grand scale. And then there were the tribes. Ah, the tribes. 10 of them, each made up of several demes scattered across Attica. This wasn't just for show. It was a calculated move to mix up the population like a salad, ensuring that no single tribe could dominate the political scene. Each tribe contributed 50 members to the Council of 500, the legislative body that Cleisthenes had envisioned as the heartbeat of his new democracy. The council was like a 6th century BCE parliament with members selected by lot, taking the concept of political lottery to a whole new level. You see, Cleisthenes was incredibly savvy about human nature. He knew that if you left political representation to an election alone, you'd likely end up with a popularity contest, where the wealthiest or most charismatic could sway the vote. By opting for a lottery system, he leveled the playing field, giving every citizen an equal chance to influence governance. It was democracy at its most raw and uncut, though not without its pitfalls. While all this sounds like a utopian dream, it wasn't all sunshine and olive branches. Cleisthenes' reforms were aimed at curbing aristocratic power, but they also inadvertently sowed the seeds for future political hiccups. For starters, not everyone was thrilled about being lumped into demes and tribes. The old aristocratic families saw their influence wane, and like a teenager reluctantly giving up their bedroom to a younger sibling, they weren't exactly pleased. This led to tensions and resistance, as the established elite grappled with their reduced status in the new order. Moreover, while the lottery system was a democratic innovation, it didn't always result in the most capable individuals leading the charge. Imagine picking your company's CEO by drawing names from a hat. You might end up with a visionary leader or someone who couldn't tell a balance sheet from a shopping list. This randomness could lead to inefficiencies and occasionally outright chaos, as the council tried to navigate complex political waters with varying degrees of competence. Economically, the reforms had ripple effects as well. By breaking up the old power blocks and redistributing political influence, Cleisthenes inadvertently created a more competitive environment for trade and commerce. The demes, with their new sense of identity and autonomy, spurred local economic activity, fostering a sense of pride and competition among citizens. It was as if the marketplace itself became a vibrant reflection of the democratic ethos, where ideas and goods flowed freely, invigorating the Athenian economy. However, this new political landscape also meant that Athens was now a city-state where everyone had a stake, but not necessarily the same vision. The introduction of a broader citizenry into the political process led to an array of opinions and interests, which could sometimes clash like cymbals in an orchestra. It was a messy, cacophonous symphony of democracy, where consensus was often hard-won and short-lived. As Cleisthenes' reforms took root, they began to transform Athens into a city with the political equivalent of a bustling agora, where every voice clamored to be heard. The demes became the foundation upon which the citizens could engage in the political process, ensuring that governance was not just the domain of the elite. In this new Athens, the people were not just spectators, but active participants in the grand experiment of democracy. Cleisthenes' legacy was a testament to his vision and ingenuity, but it was also a reminder of the complexities of human governance. His reforms laid the groundwork for what we now recognize as one of the earliest forms of democracy, but they also highlighted the inherent challenges and contradictions of such a system. It was a daring gamble, one that would shape the future of Athens and influence political thought for generations to come. Yet, the story of Cleisthenes and his democratic innovations doesn't wrap up neatly here. This was merely the prologue to a much larger narrative, where the seeds of his reforms would face the test of time, political upheaval, and human ambition. As Athens moved forward, the city would have to navigate these turbulent waters, balancing the ideals of democracy with the realities of power and governance. Cleisthenes had set the stage, but the play was far from over. The curtain would rise again, and the next act would be as unpredictable and thrilling as the first. As Cleisthenes' political roller coaster zoomed forward, Athenians found themselves in a new landscape that was as disorienting as it was exhilarating. Suddenly, everyone had a say, or at least they thought they did. The Agora, Athens' bustling marketplace, was now as much a venue for political debate as it was for buying olives. Picture merchants hawking goods alongside citizens hawking opinions. This was democracy in its infancy, and it was as chaotic as a toddler on a sugar high. The immediate aftermath of Cleisthenes' reforms was a mixed bag of enthusiasm and bewilderment. You see, for many Athenians, the concept of democracy was as foreign as vegan cheese at a Spartan feast. They were more accustomed to the top-down rule of the aristocrats, where decisions trickled down like watered-down wine at a symposium. Suddenly, they were being asked to participate actively in the governance of their city, and the learning curve was steeper than the Acropolis. Let's talk logistics. Cleisthenes had created 10 tribes, each with its own assemblies. This meant that, technically, there were now 10 different meetings where citizens could air their grievances and propose new ideas. Imagine the confusion as Athenians tried to figure out which assembly they were supposed to attend. Is it the one near the Phoenix, or the one by the Dipylon Gate? They might have wondered, scratching their heads in bemusement. It was like trying to navigate a new app update without instructions. Everyone was pressing buttons and hoping for the best. The economic impact of these reforms was just as significant. By breaking down old power structures, Cleisthenes inadvertently introduced a new dynamic to the Athenian economy. The demes, with their newfound autonomy, began to foster local enterprise, sparking a mini-economic revolution. Think of it as a series of entrepreneurial startups popping up across Attica, each with its own unique flavor. This wasn't just about political participation. It was about economic empowerment. The marketplace became not just a place to exchange goods, but ideas as well. However, with change came challenge. The redistribution of power meant that the old aristocratic families had to share the stage with a cast of new characters, many of whom were as green as the olives they bartered. This led to a fair share of political hiccups. Decisions that once took minutes now stretched into hours as every voice clamored to be heard. It was democracy in its rawest form, and efficiency was often left by the wayside, like a discarded amphora. While the reforms democratized power, they also inadvertently democratized confusion. Picture a city where everyone suddenly had a voice, but not everyone knew how to use it effectively. Miscommunication was rampant, and it wasn't uncommon for rumors to spread faster than a fire in a thatched roof. Some Athenians found themselves longing for the relative simplicity of the old ways, where decisions were made by a select few, and life moved at a predictable pace. But for those willing to embrace the chaos, there was a sense of excitement in the air. Cleisthenes had given them a stake in their city's future, and the Agora buzzed with debates that echoed well into the night. It was a time when ideas were as valuable as drachmas, and the line between merchant and philosopher blurred. Suddenly, every citizen was a potential statesman, every conversation a potential pivot in the city's fate. As the dust began to settle, Athenians started to realize that democracy was not a one-size-fits-all solution. It was a living, breathing organism that required constant nurturing and adaptation. Cleisthenes' reforms were not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a grand experiment in governance. And like any experiment, it was fraught with trial and error, successes and setbacks. Moreover, the economic realities of the time were not to be ignored. Athens was still an agrarian society at its core, reliant on the productivity of its farms and the trade ships that crisscrossed the Aegean. The new political framework had to coexist with these realities, and the balancing act was akin to juggling amphorae. One false move, and everything could come crashing down. Despite the challenges, Cleisthenes' reforms laid the groundwork for a more resilient and dynamic Athenian society. The political power that had once been concentrated in the hands of a few was now dispersed among the many. This was not just a shift in governance, it was a shift in mindset. Athenians began to see themselves as active participants in their city's success, rather than passive recipients of its fortunes. But let's not romanticize it too much. The transition was far from smooth. Cleisthenes' vision of democracy was not an instant panacea for Athens' woes. It was messy, unpredictable, and at times downright frustrating. Yet, for all its flaws, it was a system that allowed for growth and adaptation, a system that could bend without breaking. As Athens navigated this new political landscape, it became clear that Cleisthenes' reforms were as much about the journey as the destination. The immediate aftermath was a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the Athenian people, who embraced the challenge with a mix of trepidation and tenacity. It was a time of great uncertainty, but also great potential, a time when the seeds of democracy were sown in the fertile soil of a city poised for greatness. In the end, Cleisthenes' legacy was not just in the institutions he created, but in the spirit of civic engagement he inspired. His reforms sparked a political and economic renaissance that set Athens on a path toward becoming one of the most influential city-states in the ancient world. But as with any great story, this was just the beginning. The next chapters in Athenian history will be written by the citizens themselves, as they navigated the ever-shifting tides of democracy, power, and progress. Cleisthenes' impact on Athens was like setting a stone in a pond, ripples that would reach far and wide, long beyond his own time. Yet, for all the kudos heaped upon him, Cleisthenes' reforms were anything but a neat blueprint for democracy. They were more like a beta version of an app, full of potential, but needing plenty of updates and bug fixes. The romanticized vision of Cleisthenes as the grand architect of democracy makes for a great story, but it's a bit like crediting Steve Jobs with inventing the internet. Let's get real. Cleisthenes set the stage, but the show required a whole cast of characters to really get going. First, let's unpack the myth of Cleisthenes as the lone genius behind Athenian democracy. Sure, his reforms shuffled Athens into a new era, but they were more of a messy reorganization than a divine revelation. His creation of the 10 tribes and the Council of 500 was less about idealism and more about pragmatism. He needed to break the grip of the aristocratic families who treated Athens like their personal fiefdom, and his reforms did just that. By mixing people from different regions into tribes, Cleisthenes diluted the old power structures. He was playing political Jenga, carefully pulling out blocks of power and hoping the whole tower didn't come crashing down. Now, you might think the Athenians immediately embraced these changes like kids with a shiny new toy. Not quite. The reality was more akin to watching your favorite TV show undergo a cast change: skepticism, confusion, and a little bit of excitement. The demes, those mini-republics Cleisthenes championed, were supposed to empower the average citizen, but in practice, they were a mixed bag. Sure, they gave people a chance to participate, but they also opened the floodgates for local squabbles and power plays. Think of it like trying to organize a family reunion where everyone wants to host, but no one wants to clean up afterward. Economically, Cleisthenes' reforms were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they fueled local pride and competition, giving rise to a more dynamic market. On the other, they created a patchwork of regulations and customs that sometimes made trade as smooth as a rocky road. Athens was still a city-state that relied heavily on agriculture and trade, and these reforms didn't change that overnight. Instead, they created new opportunities for economic growth, while also adding layers of complexity that merchants and farmers had to navigate like a labyrinth. Politically, Cleisthenes laid the groundwork for a more participatory system, but it wasn't without its flaws. The lottery system for selecting members of the Council of 500 was democratic, sure, but it also meant that experience and competence weren't always the driving factors in governance. Imagine drawing straws to decide who gets to pilot the plane. It's fair, but not always wise. This led to a governance style that was reactive rather than proactive, where decisions were often made on the fly, and consensus was harder to reach than a golden fleece. So why all the fuss about Cleisthenes if his reforms were so imperfect? Well, here's the kicker. Cleisthenes' real legacy lies in the fact that he dared to change the rules of the game. He cracked open a door that had been locked for too long, setting the stage for future generations to refine and expand upon his ideas. The messy reality of his reforms doesn't diminish their importance. It highlights the courage it took to implement them in the first place. Cleisthenes didn't solve all of Athens' problems, but he did something arguably more valuable. He gave Athenians a taste of what could be. His reforms were like planting seeds in rocky soil, uncertain of how or when they'd sprout. Over time, they would blossom in ways Cleisthenes couldn't have imagined. The democracy he helped to shape would grow into a system that allowed for the flourishing of culture, philosophy, and art in Athens, a golden age that would echo through history. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just due to Cleisthenes' brilliance. It was the result of countless Athenians who took his ideas and ran with them, tweaking and refining until they created something that, while still imperfect, was revolutionary. In our modern quest for democratic ideals, Cleisthenes' story serves as a reminder that democracy is a living, breathing entity. It's not a finished product, but a constant work in progress, requiring vigilance, adaptation, and a willingness to face its flaws head-on. The romanticized image of Cleisthenes as a democracy pioneer is appealing, but it's the messy reality of his reforms that truly matters. They show us that the path to progress is rarely a straight line, but a winding road filled with detours, setbacks, and unexpected turns. So, while Cleisthenes wasn't a toga-wearing superhero swooping in to save the day, he was something perhaps even more valuable, a catalyst for change. His legacy is a testament to the power of bold ideas and the courage to challenge the status quo. And in a world still grappling with the complexities of democracy, that's a legacy worth remembering. As we continue to navigate our own political landscapes, let's take a page from Cleisthenes' book. Embrace the chaos, learn from the past, and never stop pushing for a better future. Medieval Europe was a place where dreams met harsh reality, and the cobblestone streets could just as easily lead you to a cathedral as they could to a bustling brothel. Life back then wasn't all about knights in shining armor and damsels in distress. It was more like knights with questionable dental hygiene and damsels doing whatever they could to keep a roof over their heads. In this wild tapestry of medieval life, one of the most misunderstood threads is that of the women who worked as prostitutes. Their lives were messy, both literally and figuratively, driven by economic necessity and shaped by the ever-watchful eyes of the church. Now, let's be honest. Being a prostitute in the Middle Ages was far from a glamorous gig. It wasn't like you'd see in a romanticized Netflix series. You were more likely to catch a whiff of something unpleasant than a whiff of opportunity. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of hygiene, or lack thereof, let's talk about why so many women found themselves in this line of work in the first place. Spoiler, it wasn't because they had a passion for medieval customer service. The medieval economy was a bit like a rickety old cart on a bumpy road. It could work, but it was far from smooth. For many women, options were limited. If you weren't born into wealth, married to it, or cloistered away in a nunnery, you might not have had a lot of choices. Work opportunities for women outside the home were scarce, and when they did exist, they didn't exactly pay what you'd call a living wage. So, many women turned to prostitution as a means of survival, especially in cities where the population was dense and the opportunities were, well, not. Cities like London, Paris, and Florence were the bustling hubs of medieval Europe, and they were also the places where the business of sex was most prevalent. In fact, the brothel scene was surprisingly organized. Municipal authorities often regulated these establishments, imposing taxes and rules. In some cities, brothels were even municipally owned. Yes, you heard that right. City-run brothels. Talk about a government job with benefits. But why did these cities tolerate, and sometimes even encourage, prostitution? It comes down to a mix of practicality and a bit of misguided morality. The church, which had a hand in nearly every aspect of medieval life, saw prostitution as a necessary evil. St. Augustine himself argued that suppressing prostitution would lead to worse vices, like adultery. It was the medieval version of harm reduction, if you will. So, while the church publicly condemned these women, they also quietly acknowledged that their work helped maintain social order by providing an outlet for lust. And speaking of lust, let's talk hygiene, or rather, the medieval misunderstanding of it. The concept of regular bathing was about as foreign to medieval Europeans as the internet is to a goldfish. Bathhouses did exist, and they were sometimes used as venues for prostitution, but the idea of daily hygiene was not a thing. In fact, many believed that bathing too often could weaken the body, so people avoided it like the plague. Actually, sometimes it was the plague they were avoiding, since unsanitary conditions led to rampant disease. For prostitutes, this lack of hygiene was both a professional hazard and a daily reality. Their work required them to interact closely with clients, making them particularly vulnerable to sexually transmitted infections, which were as common as they were untreated. The lucky ones might have access to rudimentary remedies, like herbal concoctions or mercury treatments, which were more likely to poison you than cure you. It was a roll of the dice, and not in a fun, casino night way. The living conditions in medieval cities didn't help matters. Streets were often muddy and filled with refuse, both human and animal. Households, including those of prostitutes, typically lacked running water and basic sanitation facilities. This meant dealing with waste in ways that would make a modern sanitation worker break out in hives. Imagine balancing on a tightrope of dirt, disease, and destitution, with the added pressure of societal judgment. Despite these challenges, the world of medieval prostitution was not entirely grim. There was a certain degree of camaraderie among the women, and some even managed to achieve a level of financial independence that would have been impossible in other professions. In places like Southwark, London's infamous red light district, certain brothels gained reputations for their quality of service. These establishments, while not exactly offering five-star amenities, provided a degree of protection and stability for their workers that was otherwise hard to come by. So, while the romantic image of medieval life might be dominated by chivalry and courtly love, the reality was a lot grittier, and the women who worked as prostitutes were often at the center of this reality. They navigated a world that was harsh and judgmental, but they also carved out spaces of their own amidst the chaos. Theirs was a life of resilience, where survival often depended on a delicate balance of social savvy and sheer tenacity. In the end, the story of medieval prostitutes is a testament to the complexities of human existence in any era. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of grand events, but a tapestry woven from the everyday lives of people who lived, loved, and struggled just like we do today. And while their hygiene might not have been up to modern standards, their stories offer us a mirror to reflect on the social and economic forces that continue to shape our world. Navigating the medieval landscape of dirt and disease, prostitutes found themselves at the mercy of hygiene, or the lack thereof. Let's unpack this filth fest, shall we? First up, water, or more accurately, the scarcity of clean water. Picture this, a medieval city where access to pristine water was about as common as a unicorn in a stable. Rivers, often the most convenient source, doubled as sewers. That's right, the very place you'd wash your face was also the final destination for waste. Yum, public bathhouses were the medieval fix for this aquatic dilemma, although calling them fixes might be a stretch. These bathhouses were the communal watering holes for cleanliness, social gatherings, and surprise, prostitution. But before you conjure images of a medieval spa day, let's get real. The water wasn't changed between bathers, a germaphobe's nightmare. They were more like lukewarm people soup. Yet for many, this was the closest they got to a bath, and these establishments became a crucial part of urban life, despite their questionable sanitation. The myth that everyone in the Middle Ages was perpetually filthy doesn't hold water, so to speak. Sure, cleanliness was different back then, but people weren't total strangers to the concept. They understood that dirt could carry disease, even if their methods to combat it were rudimentary at best. This is where the creative, albeit gross, methods for staying clean come into play. Perfumes and scented waters were popular, not just as luxury items, but as necessary countermeasures against the omnipresent stench. Herbs like lavender and rosemary were tucked into clothing, not just for their fragrance, but to ward off fleas and lice, those pesky roommates nobody asked for. Prostitutes faced unique challenges when it came to hygiene. Their profession demanded close contact, making cleanliness not just a preference but a necessity. Imagine trying to keep up appearances when your main workplace was a city that functioned like a giant petri dish. They often relied on the limited remedies available to them, like herbal washes or vinegar rinses, which were thought to cleanse and purify. These were the medieval equivalents of hand sanitizer, effective in theory, but probably not doing much against the real bacterial heavy hitters. Economically, it was a tightrope walk. The cost of staying somewhat clean was high, with bathhouse visits and scented concoctions eating into already meager earnings. In some cities, a bathhouse visit could cost a few pence, a small fortune for those scraping by. Yet, maintaining hygiene was crucial for survival, both for health and business. After all, in a market where options were plenty, offering a clean experience could set a worker apart. Now, let's tackle another myth, that medieval folks were oblivious to hygiene. They knew that filth was a problem, they just didn't have our modern arsenal of solutions. And to be fair, it's hard to blame them for not inventing hand soap when they were busy dealing with wars, famines, and the occasional peasant revolt. The social and political backdrop of medieval Europe further complicated matters. The Church, which had opinions on everything from how to pray to how often to bathe, often preached against excessive cleanliness, linking it to vanity and moral decay. Yet they were also aware that diseases spread like wildfire in unsanitary conditions. The result was a bizarre balancing act between spiritual cleanliness and actual cleanliness, with the latter often losing out. Prostitutes, juggling both societal scorn and the practicalities of their trade, had to be savvy. They were the ultimate entrepreneurs, navigating a system stacked against them. Hygiene, or the semblance of it, was part of the service, an unspoken promise to clients that they wouldn't leave with more than they bargained for. In a world where disease was rampant and medical knowledge was in its infancy, this was no small feat. Despite the dirt and disease, there was a certain resilience to the way medieval people approached hygiene. They did what they could with what they had, which, admittedly, wasn't much. Yet, their attempts to stay clean, however flawed, are a testament to the universal human desire for dignity amidst chaos. It's easy to laugh at their methods from our sanitized perch in history. But remember, one day our descendants might do the same to us. As we venture further into the murky waters of medieval life, it's clear that hygiene, or its absence, played a significant role. It shaped the lives of those who walked the cobbled streets, from the kings in their castles to the prostitutes in their brothels. And while we might be grateful for modern plumbing and antibiotics, there's something to be said for the tenacity of those who lived through history's grittiest chapters. Hold onto your noses, folks. The journey through medieval hygiene is far from over. While medieval hygiene was a horror show that could make any germaphobe clutch their hand sanitizer like a talisman, it's time to pivot and focus on the money trail that kept this unsanitary show on the road. Picture medieval prostitution as an economic seesaw, with high-class courtesans perched gracefully on one end and street-level workers clinging for dear life on the other. And folks, it was a bumpy ride. First up, let's talk numbers. The cost of services in medieval brothels varied wildly, much like today's housing market, only with fewer granite countertops and more questionable hygiene. In 14th century Paris, the average fee for a prostitute was around 2 deniers, roughly equivalent to the cost of 3 loaves of bread. Not exactly a king's ransom, but when you're living hand-to-mouth, every denier counts. Meanwhile, high-end courtesans could charge a small fortune, sometimes as much as 20 deniers for a single encounter, especially if they had the right connections and a reputation for discretion. These women operated in a different stratosphere, often providing companionship to wealthy merchants or even royalty, who were willing to pay a premium for their services. Financial pressures on these women were as relentless as a medieval winter. Many found themselves in the profession out of sheer necessity, facing economic hardships that would make even the savviest modern-day accountant break into a cold sweat. Widowed or unmarried women had limited opportunities to earn a living, and turning to prostitution was often a last resort, driven by the need to support themselves and their families. It wasn't a career path chosen out of passion, but a grim means to an end. And let's not forget the delightful little detail that prostitutes were often taxed by the very authorities that vilified them. Talk about a love-hate relationship. In cities like Florence, brothel owners paid substantial taxes to operate, tidy revenue stream for the authorities who simultaneously condemned the profession as immoral. Hypocrisy much. It's like a modern politician campaigning against gambling while quietly pocketing casino donations. High-class courtesans lived lives that were worlds apart from their street-level counterparts. Picture them as the influencers of their time, mingling in the upper echelons of society, their favor courted by the elite. They were well-versed in the art of conversation, fashion, and sometimes even politics, wielding influence that extended far beyond the bedroom. A successful courtesan in Venice could live in luxury, adorned in the finest silks and jewels, attending lavish parties, and even acting as confidantes to powerful men. Yet their lives were precarious. A single misstep could see them fall from grace, swapping opulent palaces for the harsh reality faced by their less fortunate peers. Meanwhile, street-level prostitutes, the rank and file of the medieval sex trade, faced a grittier existence. They operated in the shadows, often in the filthiest parts of town, where danger lurked around every corner. Their work was transactional, devoid of the social maneuvering that characterized the lives of courtesans. They had to navigate a world of violence and exploitation, with little protection from the law. In many cases, they were at the mercy of brothel keepers who acted like medieval landlords, extracting high rents for the privilege of a roof over their heads, a roof that was often leaking and infested with all manner of vermin. The moral standards of the time were as flexible as a contortionist, bending to accommodate the needs of the powerful while maintaining a veneer of righteousness. Authorities turned a blind eye to prostitution when it suited them, seeing it as a necessary evil that helped maintain social order. Yet, women in the profession were ostracized, their very existence a convenient scapegoat for society's ills. It's a double standard as old as time, where the sin is vilified, but the sinner is indispensable. In this medieval marketplace, prostitutes were entrepreneurs of necessity, their bodies the commodity in a transaction that was both economic and existential. They were part of a larger system that profited from their labor while simultaneously condemning them. It's a tale of survival in a world where the odds were stacked against them, a sobering reminder of the lengths people will go to when faced with limited choices. As we unravel the economic tapestry of medieval prostitution, it's clear that these women were more than just footnotes in history. They were central figures in the urban economies of their time, their work intertwined with the very fabric of medieval life. The hypocrisy they faced and the financial pressures they endured shine a light on the complexities of a society grappling with its own moral contradictions. Yet, despite the challenges, they carved out spaces of resilience and agency amidst the chaos of medieval existence. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the layers of this intricate history. There's more to uncover in the ever-unfolding saga of medieval life. And now, let's dive into the social cauldron that was medieval Europe, where sex workers found themselves boiling in a stew of stigma and marginalization. Picture a world where the very people who relied on these women's services were the first to cast stones, metaphorically and sometimes literally. The hypocrisy was palpable, and so was the social exclusion. These women were the outcasts of a society that needed them but didn't want to acknowledge their existence. The public narrative surrounding medieval prostitutes was a tangle of contradictions. On one hand, they were seen as necessary for maintaining societal order, providing an outlet for male desire that supposedly kept good women safe from unwanted advances. On the other hand, they were vilified and blamed for moral decay, much like a medieval scapegoat with a scarlet letter sewn onto her dress. The Church, wielding its moral scepter, painted them as sinners, while secular authorities exploited them as a revenue source. The irony was thicker than a medieval stew. The stigma extended beyond social ostracism. Prostitutes were often forced to wear distinctive clothing, a kind of sartorial branding that marked them as other. In some cities, they donned yellow veils or stripes, as if they were medieval lepers. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a form of social control. By visibly marking these women, society reinforced their status as outsiders, keeping them at arm's length both physically and metaphorically. One primary source, the sumptuary laws of 1340 in Venice, explicitly dictated what prostitutes could and couldn't wear, ensuring they were easily identifiable. These laws were less about fashion and more about keeping the social hierarchy intact. Heaven forbid a respectable woman be mistaken for one of those women. In a world where appearances could determine your place in the social pecking order, clothes were more than just garments. They were a public declaration of one's status and worth. Despite the public disdain, behind closed doors, it was a different story. Many high-born men, including clergy and nobility, frequented brothels, indulging in the very behaviors they publicly denounced. It was a classic case of do as I say, not as I do, the side of moral buffet where the elite picked and chose their vices like hors d'oeuvres at a gala. This duality speaks volumes about human nature. our penchant for hypocrisy, and the eternal struggle between public virtue and private vice. Yet, the vilification of prostitutes was not just a medieval pastime. Its echoes resonate through history, influencing cultural narratives that persist even today. The romanticized image of the fallen woman perpetuates a myth as old as time, one that glosses over the harsh realities these women faced. It's easy to paint them as tragic figures seeking redemption or love, but the truth was far grittier. Most were simply trying to survive in a world that offered them few, if any, alternatives. The cultural portrayal of prostitutes has often been more fiction than fact, with Victorian novels and Hollywood movies spinning tales of redemption and romance that have little to do with historical reality. The truth is, most medieval prostitutes were not waiting for a knight in shining armor to rescue them. They were instead navigating a complex web of societal expectations, economic necessity, and personal survival. Their stories are not fairy tales, but testaments to resilience in the face of relentless adversity. In unraveling these historical narratives, it's crucial to acknowledge the allure of the romanticized version while confronting the grim truths that lie beneath. The myth of the noble prostitute is enticing, offering a narrative of agency and choice. Yet, for most women in the medieval sex trade, agency was a luxury they couldn't afford. Their lives were dictated by economic pressures, societal scorn, and the constant threat of violence. What's fascinating is how these cultural narratives have persisted, shaping modern perceptions of sex work. The stigmatization of sex workers is a legacy that stretches across centuries, rooted in the same moral judgments and societal hypocrisies that medieval women faced. The more things change, the more they stay the same, it seems. As we continue to explore the intricate dance between perception and reality, it's clear that the story of medieval prostitutes is far from black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of human experience, colored by shades of struggle, survival, and the relentless quest for dignity in a world that offered little. Their stories remind us that history is not just about grand events, but the lived experiences of those who navigated the margins of society. So, as we peel back the layers of this historical onion, expect a few tears. It's a story that demands empathy and understanding, challenging us to see beyond the myths and confront the uncomfortable truths of our shared past. And remember, in the words of an old medieval saying, the truth may be bitter, but it is better. As we prepare to delve deeper into the medieval tapestry, we'll continue to uncover the threads of history that bind us to the past, and perhaps shed light on the path ahead. Stay tuned. The saga is far from over. As we peel back the layers of this historical onion, expect a few tears. It's a story that demands empathy and understanding, challenging us to see beyond the myths and confront the uncomfortable truths of our shared past. And remember, in the words of an old medieval saying, the truth may be bitter, but it is better. As we prepare to delve deeper into the medieval tapestry, we'll continue to uncover the threads of history that bind us to the past, and perhaps shed light on the path ahead. Stay tuned. The saga is far from over. All right, so as we wrap up our medieval journey through the muck and mire, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've unearthed. In this wacky ride through time, we've seen that the past isn't just a dusty collection of dates and kings. It's a living, breathing narrative that echoes into our present. The story of medieval prostitutes and their hygiene woes has more to teach us about today than you might think. Let's put on our proverbial time travel goggles and draw some parallels. First, let's talk hygiene, an issue that's never really gone out of style, though the stakes have certainly changed. Back then, soap was a luxury, and public bathhouses were the closest thing to a spa day, albeit with a side of social stigma. Fast forward to today, and while we've got running water and hand sanitizer at every turn, the concept of clean is no less socially loaded. Think about the countless ads selling us everything from whitening toothpaste to deodorant that promises 72-hour protection. The message is clear. Cleanliness isn't just about health, it's about social acceptance. And then there's the economic angle. Medieval prostitutes were entrepreneurs, navigating a marketplace that was both hostile and dependent on their presence. Fast forward to the gig economy of today, and you'll find echoes of the same struggle. Sure, most modern gig workers aren't facing the same level of societal scorn, but the precarious nature of their work and the lack of safety nets are eerily familiar. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? The role of the church in medieval times as both a moral compass and a hypocritical participant in the economy of sin also has its modern counterparts. Today, we see institutions that publicly denounce certain behaviors while privately benefiting from them. The gambling industry, for instance, or the myriad ways that sin taxes on alcohol and cigarettes fill public coffers. While we may not have bishops thundering from the pulpit about the dangers of cleanliness, the dance of moral posturing and practical economics continues. Now, let's tackle the lingering stigma around sex work. This is a topic that, despite centuries of societal evolution, remains as controversial as ever. Medieval prostitutes were the scapegoats for society's moral failings, a trend that hasn't entirely disappeared. Modern sex workers still face significant stigma and legal challenges, even as the conversation around their rights and protections gains momentum. The historical narrative of the fallen woman still casts its long shadow, influencing perceptions and policies to this day. It's a narrative that simplifies complex human experiences into moral tales, overlooking the economic and personal realities that drive people into this line of work. As we ponder these connections, it's tempting to ask, have we really progressed? Sure, modern society offers more opportunities and legal protections, but the core issues, economic inequality, moral hypocrisy, and social stigma, remain stubbornly persistent. We've swapped medieval streets for digital marketplaces, but the fundamental dynamics of power and survival are strikingly similar. Yet, it's not all doom and gloom. The very act of examining these histories, of pulling back the curtain on romanticized myths, is a step towards understanding and empathy. By confronting the realities of the past, we open the door to more nuanced discussions about the present. Every time we challenge a stereotype or question a societal norm, we're doing the work that those medieval women never had the chance to do openly. In the end, the story of medieval prostitutes isn't just about dirt and disease, or even the economics of survival. It's a testament to human resilience, to the ways people find dignity in adversity. It's a reminder that history is more than just a record of what happened. It's a mirror reflecting our own struggles and triumphs. So the next time you hear tales of knights and damsels, remember those who lived in the shadows, whose stories teach us as much about ourselves as they do about the past. As we close this chapter, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexity of history. It's messy, imperfect, and filled with contradictions, just like us. The medieval world may be long gone, but its lessons linger, challenging us to think critically about the narratives we accept and the ones we challenge. So here's to the past, the present, and the future, a tangled web of history that's as fascinating as it is frustrating. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep learning.